Chapter 1042. The clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole closed his eyes. The clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole also closed his eyes. Su Ming's cultivation-based clone did the same. If his soul had eyes, then at the moment he saw Bai Ling's aloof expression, he closed his eyes as well. That was Bai Ling, not Bai Su. There was no way Su Ming was mistaken. It was just like how cultivators did not dream, but Su Ming had a dream. When he woke up from his dream, he was lost, and he asked who was whose obsession. Perhaps she was his obsession, or perhaps he was her obsession. All of this happened when he woke up from his dream, but he did not wake up. The ballad of time still echoed in the destroyed space, and in the ocean of his memories, there was still a lone boat slowly sailing into the line between the sky and the sea. Who was she? This question did not remain in Su Ming's heart for long before he obtained the answer. In the past, when he was in the land of berserkers, the three powerful warriors in lunar Kulpa realm in Su Ming's soul had shown him a picture. He had once seen a woman. She was Bai Ling, but also Bai Su, and also the sacred lady of true Morning Dao World's Phoenix sect. She was also Su Hui's senior sister. So, this is the answer. But I'm no longer the me of the past. 1,000 years have passed, and I've come to understand many things. Su Ming shook his head. He calmly discovered that his heart did not ache in pain, and neither did he feel as if his heart had been devoured by the void. It was as if he had been prepared for this answer a long time ago. Even if he saw the truth at that moment, there was nothing in the world that could make him feel as if his heart was being torn apart, since he was used to being alone and experienced more things. Even when he was in Dark Mountain, the wild and beautiful woman had planted a thought in his heart. That thought had been in Su Ming's heart for 1,000 years. And when he met Bai Su in the Ninth Summit, that thought had become even stronger. It was as if there would be a faint power guiding Su Ming to remember the white hair in the snow and the promise made in the snow every once in a while. Bai Ling, when she was a child, Bai Su when she was an adult, and the sacred lady of Phoenix sect who has become ancient. What a deep obsession. Step by step, she connected the cycles of life and death and weave a net that lasted for 1,000 years. I wonder just what I have that would make Di Tian and Phoenix sect's sacred lady so obsessed with me. Su Ming smiled. If it were not for the malicious sigh, perhaps Su Ming would have continued lying to himself and not wanted to think about the lies he had created for 1,000 years. He wanted to leave behind a hint of happiness in his heart and did not want all of this to turn into a stark cruelty. He did not want to, however, he had woken up from his dream as if he had walked out from the mortal world. In the world of mortals, people would remember each other and never forget each other, yearn for and know each other, but never meet each other. After walking out, there was no more memories, no more thoughts, no more longing, no more understanding, only forgetting, only meeting after being strangers. Since that was the case, he might as well ignore the joys and sorrows of separation and reunion, face the silent ending with a smile, wake up with a smile, be less persistent, and be more free and easy. A promise would be fulfilled one day, but it would only be fulfilled to fulfill a life, not because of a certain person. Su Ming stood on the mountain rock and faced the sun. His long hair rose and fell in the mountain wind, but the wind could only move his hair and the corners of his robes. It could not move Su Ming's heart. It was as if the rising and falling hair was Su Ming's memories, and they were gradually being blown away by the wind. The only thing that could not be blown away was the dust that had frozen in the sky. Hence, his heart started freezing up and enveloped himself in layers of ice. He no longer hoped for anything beautiful. His face turned as cold as the ice in his heart. Only his heart, which no one could see, was sealed in ice, in an area where sunlight could not shine in. It was so damp that it could not be dried. Drop by drop, it dyed the fallen leaves all over the mountain red. His love was cut off. The ignorance of his first love was like a bud that had yet to bloom. Even though it was late for 1,000 years, it still chose to wither away. Su Ming smiled. There was no anguish in that smile, only a faint, old and wordless sigh. He suddenly understood that the person who had sighed in the snow and wind in the past was not someone else, but himself. In truth, this was still not right. The person who had sighed was himself, but it was not him at that time, but the present. So even that sigh was late for 1,000 years. As Su Ming smiled, he gradually started laughing loudly. His laughter echoed in the world, filling the morning with his laughter. His laughter stunned all the members of the 9th tribe. They looked over, and it also attracted the attention of Su Hui, who was in the house. "Fifth, do you have wine?" Su Ming's voice traveled through the air in the midst of his laughter. When it landed in Djo Mo Sha's ears at the foot of the mountain, he was momentarily stunned, because this was the first time he heard Su Ming address him as fifth. There was no way he would not know what this meant. Djo Mo Sha shuddered, and excitement appeared on his face. He had been waiting for this day for a long time. "I do," he shouted loudly. With one move, he fled into the mountain and appeared once again in the form of a long arc. In an instant, he stood beside Su Ming. He lifted his right hand and swung his arm, and immediately several pots of wine appeared beside Su Ming. Su Ming picked up one pot and patted off the seal. He did not even need a bowl to hold the wine. He just placed it by his lips and took a big swig. This wine was brewed by the tribes in Divine Essence Star Ocean, and it was different from what cultivators drank. The spiciness in it was like a wave of hot air that erupted in the body with a bang and charged straight into the brain. However, it did not make a person faint. Instead, it made them feel refreshed. Djo Mo Sha also picked up a pot of wine and drank with Su Ming. Su Ming put down the pot of wine and leaned against the mountain rock. His long hair spilled over his shoulders, and there was a look of indulgence on his face. Once he said those words with a smile, he took another big swig from the pot. "Fourth senior brother, what do you mean by that?" Djo Mo Sha was momentarily stunned. He mulled over those words carefully, and the more he thought about them, the more he felt that there was an ancient air contained within them. It was so heavy that it made people feel oppressed. "You don't understand." The one who answered him was not Su Ming, but Su Hui, who walked out of the house with a pale and frail face. She walked out with light steps, and when sunlight fell on her face, it reflected a beauty that was as beautiful as a rainbow. There was holiness, age, and a gentleness in that beauty. If life is only as beautiful as when we first met, I've heard many people say these words before, but none of them had a deeper impact on me than the one I heard just now. Su Hui looked at Su Ming. She saw him drinking under the sunlight. Wine spilled out from the corners of his mouth, making it hard for others to tell whether he was drinking or treating the wine as bitter. When you go through the vicissitudes of life, experience the changes in people's hearts, and go through all the paths you don't want to take but have already taken, you will sigh as you grow old. How good would it be if all the people and all the things in life could return to their earliest moments? Because the beauty of their earliest moments is a memory that can no longer be found once time washes them away. If life is only as beautiful as when we first met, Su Hui mumbled and shook her head. There are still many things you need to do in your tribe. Go, I'll accompany you. Fourth senior brother. Su Hui walked to Su Ming's side and sat down. Dressed in sackcloth, she took the now empty pot of wine from Su Ming's hands, picked up another pot, wiped off the clay seal, and placed it in Su Ming's hands. Djo Mo Sha was silent. Once he wrapped his fist in his palm and bowed to Su Ming, he quietly turned around and left. When he did so, there was a hint of nostalgia on his face. Su Ming's words appeared in his head. "If you want a drink, I'll accompany you." Su Hui also picked up a pot of wine. With a gaze that could calm a person's heart, she met Su Ming's gaze when he turned his head around and looked at her. "I've already drunk one pot." Su Ming looked at Su Hui, and there was an unruly look in his eyes. Su Hui smiled. Her smile was incredibly elegant, and there was a noble air to it. She looked at Su Ming, then lifted the pot of wine in her hand. Once she took a sip, she quickly put it down with a frown. Clearly, the spiciness of the wine had exceeded her expectations. A red flush appeared on her pale face, and she only recovered after some time had passed. However, she picked up the pot again, and this time She drank everything in one go. Once she finished drinking, she placed a pot of wine by the side and lifted her head to look at Su Ming. At that moment, there was a watery look in her eyes. "I've caught up." Su Ming stared at Su Hui for a moment, then picked up the pot of wine and placed it by his mouth. Su Hui sucked in a deep breath and picked up another pot of wine filled with wine. As if she wanted to compete with Su Ming in drinking, she picked it up and started drinking in big mouthfuls. She drank very quickly, and before long, she finished it all. There was a smug look on her face, but when she looked at Su Ming, her expression immediately froze, and hostility, as well as a hint of anger, appeared in her eyes. Su Ming put down the pot of wine and only drank a small part of it. "That's enough for today. You can drink another day," Su Ming said faintly. "No, I've already drunk 2 pots." Su Hui stood up in anger. Su Ming cast a glance at Su Hui and said calmly, "I didn't ask you to drink. You're not drinking, are you?" Su Hui glared at Su Ming and nodded. She picked up another pot, and right before Su Ming's face, she drank it all in one gulp. "I don't drink with people with a lot of moles." Su Ming's eyelids twitched. He turned his head around and put down the pot of wine. The wine was too spicy, and for some unknown reason, Su Hui's arrival made Su Ming's heart calm down. He was no longer drunk. Su Ming. Anger burned in Su Hui's eyes. She picked up the empty pot of wine and smashed it on the ground. It shattered with a loud crash. She could not circulate her cultivation base at that moment. As a woman, drinking 3 pots of wine from a tribe in Divine Essence Star Ocean made her drunk. "What did you say?" Su Ming looked at Su Hui. "I might be unconscious, but I can still hear. It doesn't matter whether you're Su Ming or Dao Kong. I don't care. What I care about is that you asked to drink, but you can't even win against me, a woman. Drink." A hint of scorn appeared on Su Hui's face. She picked up a pot of wine and handed it to Su Ming. "You drank too much." Su Ming rubbed the center of his brows. "Are you going to drink or not?" Su Hui glared at him. Her body swayed, and a dazed look appeared in her eyes, but she forced herself to not fall. "I'll drink another day." Su Ming sighed. "I drank 3 pots." Su Hui said loudly. "To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 1043. This was a woman Su Ming had never met before in terms of personality. She was usually very elegant with a hint of aloofness, as if she was a noble lady who admired herself. Once she learned that Su Ming had changed her clothes, her expression had only changed for a moment, but it soon returned to normal. Even Su Ming had to think about it carefully before he could tell whether it was real or fake. But that was nothing. Once she drank the wine, the change in her was so great that it stunned Su Ming. Su Hui's voice was very loud, and it reverberated in the area in the morning. Once most of the members of 9th Tribe heard it, they lifted their heads to look. Djo Sha sucked in a sharp breath. He was thankful that he had left quickly just now. He did not expect that the woman would be so fierce when she started drinking. "Fellow Daoist Su, good job." A woman's voice came from 9th Tribe. There was a cheerful tone in her voice, and once it rang out, other voices immediately echoed in the air. "Fellow Daoist Su, you can be said to be a hero among women for being able to drink 3 pots of our wine. Benefactor, your wife has already drunk 3 pots. Why aren't you drinking?" "That's right, drink it. Drink 3 pots. 3 pots won't do. That woman has already drunk 3 pots. Benefactor, you have to drink 9 pots. "That's right, Benefactor. We can't let those women compete with us. Drink 9 pots and let them see." "Benefactor, drink." Most of the members of 9th Tribe had learned from Djo Sha that Su Hui was a cultivator from Star Ocean. Su Ming did not hide this, and there was no need for him to lie to them. 9th Tribe's gratitude towards Su Ming could be seen from the respect they showed him over the past few days. They were also very concerned about Su Hui, and with some deductions in Djo Sha's words, they already knew that Su Hui and their benefactor should be a couple. Or else why would they be living together? Su Ming smiled wryly. A smug look appeared on Su Hui's face. Once she placed the pot of wine in Su Ming's bosom, she turned around and wrapped her fist in her palm towards the people of 9th Tribe at the foot of the mountain. She was beautiful to begin with, and now that she was drunk, there was a heroic air to her when she wrapped her fist in her palm. "Thank you, my friends from the Ninth Tribe. I've drunk too much today, but I can still drink. However, I'm not happy because a woman drank 3 jars, while your benefactor only drank half a jar." Su Hui said loudly. 1.5 pot. Just as Su Ming was about to explain, the cheers from Ninth Tribe immediately drowned out his words. Su Ming shook his head. As he looked at the valiant Su Hui and the smug look on her face, he gradually smiled. The sadness in his heart disappeared without his knowledge, and the wound that had been formed when he saw Bai Ling with a malicious eye was also slowly healing. If only life could last as long as we first met. With a smile on his face, Su Ming stood up and stood under the mountain rock. As the Ninth Tribe members cheered happily, he picked up his pot of wine and brought it to his lips to drink. Gulping sounds echoed in the air, and before long, Su Ming finished the entire pot of wine. He wiped the corners of his mouth with his sleeve and let out a long howl towards the sky. His howl spread in all directions. At that moment, in the morning light, Su Ming looked like a huge dragon looking down on the world on the mountain rock, and he roared at the sky. When Su Hui saw him, she started laughing in her drunken stupor. All the members of the Ninth Tribe laughed along with them. "Another pot!" Su Ming shouted loudly. Immediately, members of Ninth Tribe quickly brought out more pots of wine and placed them around Su Ming. He picked one up, removed the seal, and poured it into his mouth. The wine was spicy, and it was as if it had turned into a raging fire in his stomach. Some of it even trickled down the corners of Su Ming's mouth and dyed his hair, giving him a domineering air. Again, Su Ming put down the pot of wine and picked up another one. The 4th, the 5th, the 6th. When Su Ming drank a total of 9 pots, his body swayed, and as he threw his head back and laughed, he fell down with a thud. He was drunk. Su Hui, whose eyes were gradually closing, was also drunk. Su Ming could get drunk without worry, because the Duke of Crimson Flame's totem was on his arm. His cultivation-based clone was drunk, but he still had his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole fused into his body, his Akane clone guarding everything, and a malicious eye watching the area. That was why he could get drunk, and he needed to get drunk. If there was any danger, his clone could hold them back and buy enough time. Djo Sha stared at Su Ming and Su Hui, who had fallen down, then shook his head with a smile. He personally carried Su Ming's body, then arranged for a woman in his tribe to carry Su Hui. Then, he sent the 2 of them into a house and placed them on a bed. Time trickled by. Su Ming and Su Hui fell asleep in the house on Ninth Tribe's mountain. Su Ming felt as if he was dreaming again. In his dream, he seemed to see his physical body, Deep Tian, and Bai Ling, whose hood had been lifted. He also saw the battle between the Immortals and Morning Dao sect in true Morning Dao world. During it, he heard shrill roars as well as the booming sounds of divine abilities. However, they seemed to be very far away from him. Gradually, those scenes became even further away, but there was a woman's figure in his arms. She was very warm and delicate, and he subconsciously embraced her. Su Ming forgot about what happened after that. When the next morning sun shone on the house, Su Ming opened his eyes. He was first stunned, then when he turned his head to the side to look, he found that he was the only one on the bed. However, he saw a long strand of hair by his side. It was not his hair, but Su Hui's. Su Ming rubbed the center of his brows. As he circulated his cultivation base, he instantly woke up. He saw Su Hui's back turned towards him on the spot where he had previously sat on the mountain rock outside the house. She was looking into the distance. He could not see Su Hui's face. He could only see the wind lifting her hair, causing it to dance in the air and draw out beautiful arcs, just like the beautiful curves of her back. All of this was incredibly beautiful under the sunlight. Su Ming got up and walked out of the house. The peace over the past few days was one of the few times in his life. There was no danger, no fighting, no death, no shrill screams of pain echoing in his ears. All of this made Su Ming feel as if he had found the life he wanted the most. In the depths of his heart, He even had a desire to live forever in this peace. However, this desire could not be stopped by the wind. Regardless of whether he was willing or not, it was carried away by the mountain wind without any hesitation. He had no choice. There were still many things he had yet to complete. There were still many regrets he had yet to make up for. There were still many people and many things that worried Su Ming, preventing him from living forever in peace. Can you let me see the real you? Su Hui did not turn her head around. Her back was still turned towards Su Ming as she asked softly. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he closed his eyes. When he opened them again, his appearance changed swiftly. His cultivation-based clone was replaced by his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole, turning into a face that was completely different from Dao Kong's. It was Su Ming's appearance. Su Hui seemed to have noticed something. She slowly turned her head around and stared at Su Ming's face in a daze. Gradually, a smile appeared at the corners of her lips. That smile was incredibly beautiful in the breeze. I know you. You are Su Ming, and also Mo Su. You are the person who was placed on the wanted list by the forces of power from the four great true worlds 1,000 years ago. After that, you appeared once again and caused a ruckus in the area where true Sacredine World was stationed, causing a progenitor who was a master of fate and life to personally come out to hunt you down. But in the end, he couldn't kill you. Instead, the bounty on your head disappeared, tacitly acknowledging your existence. Su Ming has a great reputation in the barren lands of divine essence. He is the most eye-catching person over the past 1,000 years, and he is also the only person in Dao Kong's heart who wanted to subdue him more than Yuan. I didn't expect that. Su Hui shook her head and smiled. I didn't expect that you would have such a force of power in Blacking Planet. You could turn something rotten into something miraculous and possess Dao Kong in a reversal of fate. Looks like the mastermind behind Black Ink Auction is you. You are the master of Blacking Planet. You control everything in Blacking Planet, and you even control the auction to send out that sacred constellation robe to lure Dao Kong into your trap. I'm very curious. How did you manage to possess Dao Kong without the 9 old frail darknesses noticing anything? Even the fearless warriors controlled by Dao Kong's soul did not change in the slightest. In fact, even the soul seed progenitor Dao Chun placed between me and Dao Kong did not change in the slightest. If it wasn't because there are too many differences between you and Dao Kong, and if it wasn't because we were alone this time, I would only be able to suspect that you're not Dao Kong, Su Hui said calmly while looking at Su Ming. I also know that there is a mark on Dao Kong's body that prevents direct descendants from being possessed by others. This mark can attract the attention of the powerful warriors in Morning Dao sect to ensure that none of our family members will be possessed. But how did you avoid it? In fact, the mark is still there. How did you do it? Disbelief appeared on Su Hui's face. This was the source of what she could not understand in the depths of her heart. You want to know, Su Ming said flatly while sitting on a mountain rock. Are you afraid that once I learn of it, I will expose your identity? Su Hui suddenly asked. It doesn't matter. Su Ming smiled faintly. Su Hui fell silent. She knew that he was indeed indifferent, because it did not matter whether it was his blood or his soul. Everything about him told her that he was Dao Kong. In this sort of situation, no matter what she said, it would be useless in the end, and it would not bring her any benefits. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before he asked calmly, What happened last night? You want to know? Su Hui glared at Su Ming and turned her head away. Su Ming frowned. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he lowered his head. The sackcloth on his body instantly changed, and once it returned to the appearance of a sacred constellation robe, a vast wave of ripples spread out from within the sacred constellation robe. Su Hui quickly turned around with surprise and a solemn expression on her face. This is the voice transmission from a direct descendant of Morning Dao sect. Right when Su Hui finished speaking, a loud bang rang out from Su Ming's body, and a powerful light that surged into the heavens erupted from his body. That powerful light spread out from the sacred constellation robe and filled the entire area. An ancient voice came from within Su Ming's sacred constellation robe. Dao Kong. The immortals rebelled and broke off all relations with Morning Dao sect. Hurry up and return from the barren lands of divine essence. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1044. A total of 379 direct descendants will participate in the opening of the ancestral temple in batches. Once you inherit the glory of your ancestor and activate Morning Dao Sect's blood, your level of cultivation will increase again. Return quickly. The old voice echoed in the air, but not all the people heard it. Only Su Ming and Su Hui could hear it clearly due to the lead in their souls. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The change in true Morning Dao world mentioned by the sacred constellation robe's voice was something he had seen with his malicious eye. The immortals had broken off from Morning Dao sect, and since Su Ming did not know the details, he could not see any clues about it. He could not find the cause and effect, and he could not imagine how the immortals could fight against Morning Dao sect. However, since there was a war, then the immortals must have some degree of confidence in fighting against them. Su Hui's expression changed, because when she heard the old voice from Su Ming's sacred constellation robe, a phoenix's cry suddenly appeared in her soul. That voice echoed in her soul and turned into a power that could avoid the connection between her and Su Ming's soul. Once it formed a faint barrier, a voice that only she could hear came from the phoenix's cry. Huier, this is the first time I've used this method to send a message to you. Don't panic. Don't reveal any flaws. This was a voice transmission from her sect, Phoenix Sect. Based on the barrier that could avoid the connection between her and Su Ming's soul, it could prevent him from hearing Phoenix Sect's message. This was a power that Su Hui had never known existed. She did not know that her sect had the ability to create such a barrier. The barrier was like a crack on a dam. In fact, with Su Hui's intelligence, she could already imagine that the so-called marriage agreement and seal between Phoenix Sect and Morning Dao Sect was not so sturdy that it could not be torn. If the seal could be shielded, then there was naturally a huge flaw in it. However, that flaw was usually hidden very deeply. Only at the most critical moment would it be discovered, and then the seal would be broken so that Phoenix Sect could leave Morning Dao Sect. Dao Kong is by your side. Don't let him see any clues. When I sent you to Morning Dao Sect as Dao Kong's wife, I felt terrible, but I had to do it. I can only fight for a promise for you. But now, this promise is no longer important. Phoenix Sect has decided to break off relations with Morning Dao Sect. All the seals will be broken, and from now on, you will be free, and Phoenix Sect will be free. But you have to kill Dao Kong. Your level of cultivation far surpasses his. Once you find a chance to kill him, quickly return to true Morning Dao world. Remember this, Dao Kong is incredibly important to Morning Dao Sect. I didn't realize how important he was in the past, but now that I think about it, there seems to be some sort of profound meaning behind Morning Dao Sect sending Dao Kong to the barren lands of divine essence. I only learned recently that the one who gave the order to send Dao Kong to the barren lands of divine essence was the sleeping Kulpa Lord of Morning Dao Sect. Your mission is to kill Dao Kong, and I will help you break the seal once he dies. Su Hui's face was pale to begin with. When she heard the voice in her soul, she staggered, and her face turned even paler. She looked towards Su Ming. Su Ming narrowed his eyes, and a brilliant light shone in them. Just like Su Hui, a voice that only he could hear was echoing in his head. That voice had also turned into a barrier that prevented Su Hui from hearing it. Kong Air, don't be in a hurry to come back. You used the sacred constellation robe's voice just now so that Su Hui, who followed you to the barren lands of divine essence, could hear it. This woman's sect has already begun to rebel, and it's laughable that she thought that Morning Dao Sect didn't know about it. Be careful. You could decide on your own whether you want to kill this woman. The 9 old frail darknesses have a treasure that specifically targets Phoenix Sect. If this woman's heart is on your side, then you can be at ease, but if she's wavering, then you can just kill her. With your schemes, I will trust your decision. Remember, Kong Air, don't come back for the time being. The voice gradually faded away, Su Ming looked towards Su Hui and met her gaze. Su Hui remained silent for a moment before she said softly, "My sect asked me to kill you. They chose to break off relations with Morning Dao sect. The immortals are not the only ones who participated in this change in Morning Dao sect. Phoenix sect is also involved. I believe there are other forces of power involved as well." Su Hui rubbed the center of her brows. Her face was pale, and she looked slightly haggard. "You're still injured. Rest," Su Ming said faintly and sat down on the mountain rock. He did not continue the topic. Su Hui was silent for a moment before she looked at Su Ming. "Are you going back?" "It's not time yet." Su Ming shook his head. "When will you leave?" Su Hui closed her eyes. When she opened them after some time, resolve appeared on her face. "With your injuries, you will recover in another half a month. At that time, I will leave," Su Ming answered softly while staring at the sky in the distance. "I'll go with you," Su Hui said calmly. Su Ming was silent. After a moment, he turned around and looked at her. After a long while, he nodded. A smile appeared on her face. She turned around and returned to her house. As if he had forgotten about the great battle that was happening in true Morning Dao world, Su Ming stayed in peace on the mountain belonging to Ninth Tribe. He watched the sun rise and set. There was always wine by his side, and Su Hui would occasionally accompany him. This sort of life flowed by like water, and life seemed like a dream. It lasted from morning to dusk, from the night drum to the morning bell. The two of them no longer talked about anything related to true Morning Dao world, as if neither of them wanted to talk about it. Half a month passed by slowly. Flowers might not have bloomed or withered, but the moon was full and waning. Half a month passed by in the blink of an eye. Su Ming could not say how much of a bustling city was gradually fading into the distance, and neither could he say how bright the stars were. However, during that half a month, Su Ming forgot about his troubles and his bewilderment. It was as if he had returned to the mortal world. Su Hui's smile had also increased during that half a month. It could be seen that she was the same as Su Ming. The happiness she felt during that half a month seemed to be able to compare to the happiness she felt during the first half of her life. However, youth doesn't last forever. Happy times are always short, and beautiful music is destined to end at some point in time from the moment it starts to be played. On that day, rain fell from the sky of Ninth Tribe. This was the first time Su Ming saw rain in this place. He did not want to use his malicious eye to see how the rain appeared. He was afraid that if he saw it too clearly, he would lose the meaning of rain. When rain fell on the ground, dust and fog were stirred up. If anyone took a closer look, they would find that the dust and fog were like waves. There was a feeling of clouds and fog surrounding the land, causing all those who saw it to look at it quietly and not want to avert their gazes. It was as if the wind and frost in the world of mortals had turned into a long and drawn-out song of sorrow and resentment. The moaning wind in the distance made it seem as if someone was playing a sun, and it broke through the rain and fog that filled his eyes. Su Ming continued watching. Su Hui. He turned his head around and looked at a woman who was tidying up her luggage in the house. Her long hair spilled over her shoulders, and there was a gentle charm about her that made her look as beautiful as a flower. She turned her head around and looked at Su Ming. "Sit here. I'll draw you a picture," Su Ming said faintly. Su Hui smiled faintly and put down her luggage. She did not put it away into her storage bag, but instead went to Su Ming's side. She found a mountain rock and sat down on it. Behind her was the curtain of rain that filled the sky and the indistinct land. The moaning wind shuttled through her hair, along with the wisps of black hair that drifted in the air. "You know how to draw?" Su Hui blinked. "I've drawn before." When Su Ming spoke, he patted his storage bag, and a drawing board immediately appeared in his hand. This drawing board was not one that belonged to the berserkers in the past, but one that Su Ming had seen by chance when he was in Black Ink Planet. "Oh, how's your drawing?" Su Hui smiled and even lowered her head to look at her clothes. She straightened some of the creases on them. "I can't draw people with few moles, but if they have a lot of moles, it'll be easier for me to draw them. Don't change your expression, it'll affect my drawing." When Su Ming saw Su Hui's stiff expression, He frowned and said those words. Su Ming, you're going overboard. Su Hui stood up swiftly with anger on her face. Which part of me have a lot of moles? If you don't explain it to me today, then I won't let you off. Do you really want me to say it? Su Ming's face was expressionless. You. Su Hui sucked in a deep breath, then suddenly turned around and spoke to the people of Ninth Tribe at the foot of the mountain. Djo Sha, your senior brother wants to drink. Bring 20 pots of wine from your tribe over. Djo Sha was originally meditating at the foot of the mountain. When he heard those words, his expression remained the same, and not a single hint of change could be detected on his face. He had heard these sorts of words over the past half a month, and he knew that usually, when he said them, his senior brother would definitely shrink back. There was no need for him to bring the wine over. You don't have any moles on your body. Su Ming smiled wryly. Su Hui glared at him, then sat down again. She straightened her clothes and looked at him with a smile. I don't have 8 moles, Su Ming said again, picking up the drawing board. When he saw that Su Hui's expression had changed again, Su Ming lifted his right hand and tapped the raindrops by the mountain rock. As if he had stuck them with ink, he drew on the drawing board. The clarity of the paper was like the calmness of the heart. The splash of ink seemed to bring with it the happiness that remained in Su Ming's eyes. As Su Ming's hand moved, it gradually dyed the paper with colors that made it seem as if it had been separated from the world. However, the paper could no longer return to its original state, but it gained an unprecedented beauty. There were gains and there were losses. That was how life was. It was just like that saying, if only life could be as beautiful as it was at first sight, but sometimes the beauty at first sight could not compare to the peace that came after time had passed. It was just like the paper. When there was no drawing, it was blank, but when it was drawn, which one was more beautiful? Only the person who drew the paper would know. Only the person who had experienced it would know. Su Ming continued drawing. Rain, the ground, the sky, and a woman's figure appeared in his drawing. The beautiful memories of Dark Mountain were still around, but as the wind and clouds changed, they were like dust falling on the surface of a river. They disappeared without a trace, and no ripples could be stirred up. He did not draw randomly on the paper. The wind outside the mountain filled my sleeves, and the beauty before the rain was right in front of me. If I do not frown, and if I do not draw my heart, this is a change of heart. Requesting recommendation votes to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1045. Before she finished drawing, Su Hui's heart was already trembling. She stared at Su Ming in a daze. She could clearly see that once he drew the first line, he seemed to have become ethereal. This ethereal feeling made it seem as if his body had disappeared. In fact, even his presence and soul had vanished completely. Even with the connection between Su Hui and Su Ming's cultivation-based clone, she could not notice a single thing. It was as if he was sitting there, but he did not seem to exist. It was also as if he had fused together with the mountain, with the ground, with the sky, with everything in the world, and even with the rain and the wind blowing towards them. He had completely fused with the mountain, and they could not be distinguished from one another. This was not painting. This was painting from the wind, from the rain, from the sky, from the earth, from everything in the sky, to make a copy of the 8 wastelands. What caused Su Hui to suck in a deep breath was that at the instant Su Ming stepped into the ethereal state, his cultivation base started fluctuating, and in a manner that shocked her, it started rising swiftly. From a middle stage of World Plane Realm, he had managed to approach the later stage of World Plane Realm in such a short amount of time. A term immediately appeared in Su Hui's head when she saw this sort of cultivation. Epiphany. This was epiphany. Besides this term, Su Hui could not find any other way to describe it. A person's cultivation base could suddenly increase in such a manner without taking any medicinal cores or cultivating too much. This caused her to recall something that her master had said in the past. The ancient people mainly cultivated their hearts. They continuously questioned their own hearts and tried to understand the truth of the world. It did not matter whether it was a big or small matter. Cultivating one's heart was the same as cultivating one's self. When they tried to understand the world, they would occasionally gain epiphanies, and their cultivation bases would not be able to be understood by common sense. Right now, our cultivation bases are already half done with our hearts, and our arts occupy the other half. I'm afraid that we will no longer have the chance to gain epiphany. Su Hui's breathing quickened, but she was very careful not to interrupt Su Ming's drawing. She maintained her smile and made herself not move. She was worried that if she did anything, it would affect Su Ming's epiphany. Once he woke up from it, he would lose his serendipity. She watched as Su Ming drew, and the ripples of his cultivation base became stronger. After a moment, thunder roared beyond the mountain. Rain surged into the sky, and the ground even trembled slightly. A gigantic vortex appeared above Su Ming at the top of the mountain. It swept through the area, sweeping up the rain and mountain wind, turning into a strange sight. The members of the 9th tribe noticed it. When they lifted their heads to look at the vortex in the sky, they also noticed the ripples of power coming from Su Ming. Right when the uproar rose, it was immediately stopped by Djo Shah. He stared at the spot where Su Ming was in a daze, then at his figure. His breathing quickened, and excitement appeared on his face. Change of heart, this is... Master once said that his disciple has a unique change of heart technique. Djo Shah understood the change of heart, and he knew that this moment was incredibly important to Su Ming. That was why not only did he suppress the commotion among his people, he also put on a wary expression and personally guarded the area. I wonder, when will my change of heart arrive? Djo Shah mumbled softly. Time trickled by. Several hours had already passed since Su Ming started drawing. The rain in the sky gradually lessened, and the wind gradually became weaker. Su Hui continued moving. Even if rain poured on her body, she still did not move. There was still a smile on her face, but there was anxiousness in her eyes. She was not anxious because she had not moved for several hours, but because she had seen Su Ming's level of cultivation reach the later stage of World Plane Realm 7 times during those few hours. But all of them had failed. She knew that there was a barrier between the middle stage of World Plane Realm and the later stage of World Plane Realm. This barrier was incredibly difficult to break. She had only managed to do so in the past because her master had helped her with everything he had. However, she believed that as long as Su Ming was given enough time, he would definitely be able to break through the middle stage of World Plane Realm and move into the later stage of World Plane Realm. She might not know why Su Ming's level of cultivation was sometimes strong and sometimes weak, but she believed that it was definitely related to his possession. However, Su Hui could sense that the rain was gradually becoming lighter, and the wind was also gradually dispersing. Once the wind and rain were gone and the sky returned to normal, Su Ming's drawing would come to an end. If he still did not reach a breakthrough at that time, then his epiphany would come to an end, and he would need the next serendipity before he could continue. This was something Su Ming understood. Every single time the change of heart art changed, a person's heart would go through a metamorphosis. Their soul and everything about them would move toward a higher point, but there would still be a barrier in the level of cultivation that would be stirred up by this metamorphosis. If they could not get through this barrier, then they would come to a halt. That was why Su Ming chose Dao Kong as his cultivation-based clone. In truth, this cultivation-based clone was like a vessel, and Su Ming chose this vessel so that it would be easier for him to break through the barrier. And this so-called potential, in truth, was determined by how many barriers there were and how thick they were. That was why Su Ming chose to destroy Yi Wang's Kismet. Once he destroyed it, the only person who could gather Kismet over the years in true Morning Dao world would be Dao Kong. This was also the reason why Dao Kong was valued by Morning Dao sect. However, Kismet was an incorporeal thing. Very few people could see through it and control it. Even Su Ming could not do it at that moment. He could only use his own method to change it or push it forward to indirectly guide the Kismet that existed in the dark. Just like now, boom, a thunderclap rang out in the sky. It shook the entire area. As it reverberated in the air, The rain that was about to disappear started pouring down like a torrent once more. The wind that was about to disappear started stirring up once more. The rain did not stop, and neither did the wind stop. Everything became even more violent. Was this kismet? Perhaps it was. Perhaps even if there was no such thing as kismet, the rain was bound to not stop. But if it continued raining for several days, perhaps this was truly kismet. The second day, the third day, until the fifth day. During those 5 days, heavy rain poured down and continuously fell on the ground. Dark clouds filled the sky, and the mountain wind was so strong that it rampaged through the world. Suhui sucked in a deep breath. During those 5 days, she did her best to remain still and not disturb Su Ming's drawing. Finally, when dusk arrived on the fifth day, Su Ming's cultivation base surged once more. Loud booming sounds came from his body, and a vast ripple of power erupted from his body. That was not the middle stage of World Plane Realm, but the later stage of World Plane Realm. Su Ming's cultivation base clone had truly stepped into the later stage of World Plane Realm, just like his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole. Only at that moment could Su Ming be considered to have truly stepped into the category of powerful warriors. Any one of his clones could become an overlord of an area. Previously, when the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole had overlapped and fused with his cultivation-based clone, he could bring forth the power of those who had attained great completion in the later stage of World Plane Realm. But right then, he could bring forth the true power of those who had attained great completion in World Plane Realm, and this was not even including the power of Divine Essence. If he had Divine Essence, then he would no longer need the projection formed by a Kang's power to fight against those in Lunar Culpa Realm like when he saved Su Hui in the desert. Right now, he did not need a Kang's projection to fight against those in Lunar Culpa Realm, and this was not counting his Kang clone. If a Kang's projection appeared, Su Ming did not know what sort of offensive abilities he would possess, but it was clear that he would be able to fight against those in Solar Culpa Realm. If his Kang clone personally came and the 3 clones fused together with their souls as a link, the offensive power that erupted from them would be astonishing. It would be even stronger than when Su Ming had walked out of Western Ring Nebula's foreign lands and charged into the area where true Sacredine World was stationed. Perhaps he still could not be known as the strongest under Masters of Fate, but as long as he took another step forward, when all his clones that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole and his cultivation-based clones reached great completion in the later stage of World Plane Realm, he would be known as the strongest under Masters of Fate, and Fate. If his Akang clone devoured the other Akangs, its combat abilities would increase by leaps and bounds. This was the terrifying inborn ability of the Abyss Builders. Su Ming opened his eyes. Perhaps more accurately speaking, he had never closed his eyes in the first place. What opened at that moment was his soul. The sky instantly fell silent. The thunder no longer roared, the rain disappeared, the mountain wind dissipated, and the sky was clear. Su Ming looked at the drawing board in his hand. The curtain of rain was falling on it, and there was a petite figure inside. Wind fluttered her black hair, and her smile seemed to contain a world, causing all those who saw it to be unable to help themselves but smile as well. "Thank you." Su Ming lifted his head and looked towards Su Hui. There was a smile on Su Hui's face, and it was the same as the one in the drawing. There would always be a time when they had to part. There would always be a day when they would part. On the second day after Su Ming woke up, he left the mountain where Ninth Tribe was located. He left the land and the near 1,000 members of Ninth Tribe worshiping him. He did not take Dgomo Sha with him, but he took a map of the 4 venerated races in the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean, which had surrounded and attacked his master in the past. If there was a grudge, then he would definitely take revenge. This was Su Ming's principle. Besides this, he also left behind a sentence that made Dgomo Sha lower his head and bow towards Su Ming. "No matter what Master is like, I've already treated you as my junior brother." These words caused Dgomo Sha's body to tremble. He looked at Su Ming and saw the light of wisdom in his eyes, as if he could see through his heart. Gradually, an indescribable shame appeared on Djo Mo Shah's face. He lowered his head quietly, but because of these words, his heart started echoing. This was Su Ming's acknowledgement. When Su Ming had first seen the 5 stones under his master's statue, he had already been able to tell that the 5th stone had been placed behind him. It might have looked no different from the other 4, but the stone that represented the 4 of them was under his master's feet, and the 5th stone was outside his feet. This small detail allowed Su Ming to understand many things. He could imagine that many years ago, there had always been a teenager beside his master. He longed to acknowledge his master as his master, but even when Tian Xiezi left into the distance, he had not been able to do so. However, he did not give up. He protected the tribe and completed Tian Xiezi's request before he left. He had no complaints or regrets. In fact, during the 1,000 years of growth, he had even treated himself as Tian Xiezi's disciple. He placed the 5th stone before his statue. That was why he only said half of Su Ming's sentence. The other half was left in his heart. This complete sentence should be, "Master will not take in a 5th disciple, but no matter what, I have already treated you as my junior brother." Su Ming left. This time, the person who accompanied him was not the loneliness he was used to, but Su Hui. They headed to the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean and the 4 venerated races who had chased after his master in the past. Su Ming and Su Hui turned into 2 long arcs and gradually disappeared from the eyes of the members of 9th Tribe. They also disappeared from Djo Mo Shah's eyes. "Senior brother," Djo Mo Shah mumbled. This was the first time he did not feel anguish in the depths of his heart when he called Su Ming his senior brother. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1046. Who was it that could not see through the reflection of the moon in the water? Who was it that left into the distance and became indistinct in other people's eyes? Who was it that saw through the beauty of youth? Su Ming, who did not turn his head around, just watched the clouds swim around him with a smile, then lowered his head and flicked his fingers? Perhaps the dust that danced in the air was a brilliance that no one else could see. But Su Ming knew that the flick of his fingers and the clouds would last for 1,000 years in the world. He would no longer think about it, no longer recall it. He would let the beautiful memories of the past remain forever in his heart. He would not come into contact with reality or the truth. He would leave behind a beautiful memory for himself and an obsession for others. What he cut off was the love in his heart and the obsession of others who had been entangling him from afar. I kept the beautiful memories, but I, Su Ming, am never someone who will be schemed against by others. A piercing cold look appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He had continued being obsessed with the obsession because he wanted to personally find the person who had planted it in his heart. This was Su Ming's personality. He was someone who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance, just like how he headed to the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Searching for clues about Lai Shan Xiu had become secondary. His true goal was to wreak havoc in Divine Essence Star Ocean. He wanted to make the 4 venerated races who had chased after his master in the past pay a heavy price. Su Ming walked calmly in the galaxy and asked faintly without turning his head back, "How many people have you killed in your life?" Not too many. Most of Su Hui's cultivation base had recovered, but she still wore the sackcloth. She had not changed out of it. "I haven't killed many," Su Ming said calmly. Su Hui turned her head around and looked at him. There was a slightly strange expression on her face. Forget about what she had not seen. Just the waves of tears alone was enough for her to sense the murderous aura around Su Ming's body. If this was not considered a lot, then Su Hui suddenly felt that her answer just now should have been very few. Each of the 4 venerated races in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean has 100,000 something people. I won't kill many. Each race has 30,000 people, Su Ming said faintly. Su Hui was silent for a moment before she said softly, "If they can become the venerated races in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, then they must have people who are masters of fate, lives, and death. 1 per race. I know this. Su Ming turned into a long arc and charged through the galaxy. Su Hui accompanied him by his side. When she heard his words, she smiled faintly and did not continue asking questions. Since Su Ming knew about the dangers but still chose to move forward, then he must have some degree of confidence, or else he would not have died in the galaxy for no reason. Time trickled by. A normal cultivator would need a long time to move from the periphery of divine essence star ocean to the inner part, and there would be countless dangers during the process. However, Su Ming and Su Hui could shift, causing their speed to increase exponentially. If that was all, they would be much faster, but if they wanted to reach the inner ring, they would still need dozens of years. However, with the map from Ninth Tribe, there were quite a number of relocation spots for the vortices in space marked on the map. Because of it, he could close the distance between them. Based on Su Ming's estimations, he would be able to step into the inner parts of divine essence star ocean in about 10 years. The process was long. Based on Su Ming's calculations, the distance from the periphery of divine essence star ocean to the inner part was the same as reaching the entrance to the barren lands of divine essence. The distance was so great that it was a ravine that a mortal would not be able to cross even if they were reincarnated thousands of times. Fortunately, he was not alone this time. There was a woman by his side. Fortunately, before she left Ninth Tribe, she had taken away a large amount of wine stored in Ninth Tribe when Su Ming was not paying attention. Because of that, Su Ming, who was already used to loneliness, could no longer get used to it. The conversations he heard at that time usually had a unique tone to them. Just what happened that night. Several years later, Su Ming sat on a rapidly flying meteor and looked at Su Hui, who was drinking wine beside him. At that moment, Su Hui's valiant and heroic bearing gave Su Ming an indescribable feeling. You don't know what happened? Su Hui blinked and looked at Su Ming. The few years they had spent together might have passed by in the blink of an eye, but nearly 1,000 days and nights in the galaxy as their companions had caused the two of them to seem to have become slightly different from before. Su Ming cast Su Hui a glance and said faintly with an expressionless face, "I feel like I'm hugging something. It's very soft." Su Hui smiled faintly and continued drinking. She lifted a pot of wine and tossed it to Su Ming. "Can you not always drink like this? You get drunk every time." Su Ming frowned and picked up the pot of wine. "It's better if I'm drunk. You can walk on your own." Su Hui narrowed her eyes into the shape of crescent moons. A dazed look gradually appeared in her eyes. When Su Ming saw this, he sighed. He knew that Su Hui was drunk again. After a moment, Su Ming jumped up from the meteor with the sleeping Su Hui in his arms. This was not the first time he had hugged a drunk woman. Over the years, he seemed to have gotten used to it. Every single time she drank, she would not use her cultivation base to circulate it. Every single time she got drunk, she would fall into a deep sleep. The smile that appeared at the corners of her lips made Su Ming feel as if he could see the fatigue in her heart, as well as the wariness she had towards all the people around her. It was as if she could only sleep at ease when she was with him, or perhaps she liked the feeling of being hugged by Su Ming when she was drunk. No one knew whether Su Hui had done it intentionally or not, but she had wrapped her arms around Su Ming's neck and buried her head in his bosom. Her long hair floated in the air and intersected with Su Ming's hair, as if they were inseparable. Perhaps this was what she hoped for. Su Ming moved forward quietly in the galaxy, with Su Hui in his arms. After the time it takes for an incense stick to burn, his footsteps suddenly came to a halt. Once he scrutinized his surroundings, he lifted his right hand and swung it forward. Immediately, a wave of air spread through the area. It was swiftly sucked into a spot the size of a palm in front of him. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He observed it carefully for a moment before he took a step into the invisible vortex and disappeared without a trace. This was not the first time he and Su Hui had relocated through the vortex on their way to the inner part of divine essence star ocean. Su Ming, who was already familiar with the process, instantly appeared in the colorful world. He did not close his eyes, but kept them open. As his body was brought forward, he lowered his head to look at the darkness at the end of the colorful world. In just the span of a few breaths, A smile appeared at the corners of Su Ming's lips. A roar came from the darkness, causing the colorful world to tremble. At the same time, the jellyfish-like existences floating around Su Ming moved back simultaneously. The black horse with two dragon heads charged out from the endless darkness. The two dragon heads glared at Su Ming, and the horse's head panted harshly. When it stomped on the ground with its hooves, flames instantly started burning in the area. The color of the flames was black, and when combined with the horse's body, it made the horse look incredibly mighty. This was the third time Su Ming had relocated through the vortex on his way here. If he could be considered, this was the fourth time he met the horse's gaze. Every single time before this, as long as Su Ming appeared in the world in the vortex, the black horse would immediately notice him. No matter how far away he was, it would use its unique method to swiftly close in on him. Enraged roars reverberated in the air. When the black horse lowered its head, it rushed out with killing intent burning in its body. With a response to Su Ming's provocation, it charged towards him. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. His previous experiences had allowed him to know that while the horse would get closer to him every single time, it would not be able to catch up to him. Judging by the spot where it had appeared, it should only be able to catch up to him 7 breaths after he left. You are mine. One of these days, you will carry me to the ends of the earth and hell. Su Ming smiled faintly. When he spoke, the black horse's roars became even more astonishing. It looked as if it was about to rush towards Su Ming, but he had already disappeared and left the world in the vortex. Once Su Ming walked out of the galaxy with Su Hui in his arms, he did not immediately move forward. Instead, he listened attentively by the side. 6 breaths later, an incredibly faint rumble echoed faintly from the vortex where he had left. I'm 1 breath short. Su Ming's eyes sparkled. He made some calculations and found that he roughly had 3 more chances to enter the world in the vortex. After those 3 times, the black horse would be able to catch up to him, and at that time, it would be time for him to capture it. After a moment of pensive silence, Su Ming cast a glance at Su Hui in his arms. Once he pushed her away, he shook her violently until she opened her sluggish eyes. You're awake. It's your turn. When Su Ming saw Su Hui open her eyes, he let go of her, sat down cross-legged, and closed his eyes. Su Hui rubbed her eyes and said in a resigned manner, You cheated. We agreed that each of us would travel a certain distance. It's your turn now, Su Ming said faintly without opening his eyes. The relocation vortex doesn't count. Su Hui glared at him. You didn't say anything before, so it doesn't count. Are you a woman or not? Are you not going to admit to your words? Su Ming opened his eyes and cast her a sideways glance. You know better than me whether I'm a woman or not, Su Hui said without hesitation. Su Hui said without hesitation. Her words rendered Su Ming speechless for a long time. He had a feeling that the situation was the other way around. In silence, Su Ming decided to close his eyes and ignore her. Su Hui let out a light harumph and circulated her cultivation base. Once she got rid of her drunkenness, she lifted her right hand and swung it. Immediately, a fire phoenix appeared under her. It let out a screech and swept up the seated Su Ming before charging forward. Su Hui stood on the phoenix's head and occasionally sized up her surroundings. She would occasionally turn her head around to look at Su Ming, who was training with a calm expression on his face. How petty! I don't have any moles on my body, so of course I'm petty. Su Ming opened his eyes, then closed them again. I know what you wanted to say, but I'm not going to say it. Su Hui smiled and spoke in a manner that only Su Ming could understand. Look, there are a lot of people saying that I wrote pretty well yesterday and the day before yesterday, but why didn't I get more recommendation votes and monthly votes? Come on, all of you come on. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Achidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1047. True Morning Dao World. It was a war that shook the entire True World, causing even the Emperor of Abyss True World and True Sacredine World to pay attention to it. It had just started, but it was already incredibly devastating. Almost all the races in true Morning Dao world had worked together to fight against Morning Dao sect. It could be said that Morning Dao sect was surrounded by enemies. In the beginning, they were caught off guard by the Immortals' rebellion, which had been formed by them through some unknown method. However, Morning Dao sect was powerful and could control an entire true world on its own, so it was definitely not to be underestimated. Once they fended off the first wave of attack from the Immortals' Union, they launched a fierce counterattack. Roars surged into the sky from all the battlefields in the true world. The booming sounds were the loudest in true Morning Dao world during that period of time. The destruction of cultivation planets and a large number of deaths caused the stench of blood to fill every single corner of true Morning Dao world. There was a sect called Hundred Flowers sect in the Immortals territory. All the people in that sect were handsome, and they were a small sect in the Immortals world. 700 years ago, a man came to the sect. He was as gentle and elegant as a flower. He liked to let the sun shine on his face, and he liked to play with flowers and plants. He liked to flirt with the female disciples of the sect, and he seemed to be flirting with them. 700 years ago, he was a disciple who had just joined the sect. 700 years later, he became a core disciple, but he still retained his personality. He made people like him, but also made them feel helpless and jealous of him. Of course, most of that jealousy came from men. His name was Hua Yinyu. He was a man whose name was Hua. You are inside the Hundred Flower sect's mountain gate. In a garden, a woman's helpless voice floated out. Please call me second senior brother. A man dressed in a long white robe with a head full of long hair stood under the sun and looked at the woman with a mature and charming air in front of him with a smile. I am your master, the woman sighed. But 700 years ago, you were my junior sister. The man shook his head and walked to the woman's side. He gently combed her long hair that was blown by the wind. The woman lowered her head. She did not resist the man's actions when she said softly, It's just as you said, the Immortals Union has waged war against Morning Dao sect. I've also formed a large number of small sects based on your request. 700 years might not be a lot, but it's enough for 39 sects to become affiliated to Hundred Flowers sect. Then, is my name on the boat heading to the land of the source of God confirmed? The man whispered into the woman's ear. I'm not sure yet. The woman subconsciously took a step back. Very well, but the people from Morning Dao sect guarding the barren lands of divine essence should have been summoned back, right? The man smiled faintly. The woman lifted her head and asked in puzzlement, Why must you go to the barren lands of divine essence? That place is a prison. The man shook his head and looked at the sky without saying anything. There was something in his heart that he couldn't say to the woman in front of him. Because my little junior brother is there. In true Morning Dao world was a territory that did not belong to the Immortals. There was a race called Heavenly Wu. There was a gigantic sect in the galaxy belonging to that race. From the outside, that sect looked to be formed by countless huge swords. They floated in the galaxy and surrounded a cultivation planet. There was an incredibly distinct building on that planet. It was a sword. The part of the sword that was revealed to the world was 100,000 something feet long. It pierced through the planet, and the tip of the sword was also 100,000 something feet long. From the distance, the planet and the sword were the center of attention. There were 300 cultivators dressed in black robes sitting around the sword on the cultivation planet. Their heads were covered by robes, and they did not move, but there was a heinous, murderous aura brewing around their bodies. It was as if the moment they stood up, they could make the weather change and the wind and clouds surge. All of them were in the middle stage of world plane realm. In fact, it was clear that there were seals in their bodies. If they were broken, no one knew what sort of dazzling light would erupt from their bodies. Dong! 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 The sounds of war drums echoed swiftly in the area. As they did so, the 300 cultivators in the area slowly lifted their heads. Their gazes were focused on the tip of the sword they surrounded. It might have been indistinct, but there was a picture in their minds. In that picture was a person sitting cross-legged on the tip of the sword that looked as if it existed in the galaxy. There was a huge drum in front of that person, and the sound of the drum had come from him striking it with his right hand. That person did not have a head. His upper body was bare. His nipples were his eyes, and his navel was his mouth. In his left hand was a battle axe that was several dozens of feet long, and in his right hand was a fist that he was striking the drum. He was known as Shingon by the people in the sect. He had joined the sect 700 years ago. During those 700 years, the speed at which his level of cultivation rose shocked everyone. But what was even more unbelievable was the fighting spirit on his body. The strength of that fighting spirit caused the murderous aura on his body to be so thick that just one glance at him would be enough to make a person feel as if they had been plunged into hell. This was a body that was publicly acknowledged by all the cultivators in the sect, the innate malevolent body. The sound of the drum was like thunder. As booming sounds surged into the sky, the headless Shingon stood up. At the instant his tall body stood up, the world lost its color, and booming sounds rang out endlessly in the air. Lightning howled in the sky. At the same time, the bolts of lightning illuminated the ground. They intersected with each other to form a gigantic face in the sky. Tianwu, a muffled roar echoed out from within the headless man's body. It echoed out in all directions, drowning out the sound of thunder. You promised me that as long as I, Shingon, join Tianwu race, you will execute your divine ability and send me to the barren lands of divine essence. As the man's roar reverberated in the air, the 300 people under the sword stood up simultaneously. An indescribable, murderous aura erupted from their bodies. The strength of that murderous aura caused the 300 people's presences to connect together, causing a powerful wave of impact to appear around the sword. As that wave of impact swept out in all directions, it filled the entire cultivation planet. If anyone looked over, they would find that the cultivation planet was surrounded by fog. That fog was formed by the murderous aura. It was an illusion formed by the kismet of the world that had been chased away from this place at that moment. There were also countless vengeful souls within that fog. There were men and women among them, ferocious beasts and cultivators, and they were all howling shrilly. During the past 700 years, I've killed 1 billion lives for your heavenly clan. As the man on the tip of the sword spoke, the vengeful souls that surrounded the entire cultivation planet began to wail even louder. They were the 1 billion human souls that had been killed by the man on the tip of the sword. When are you going to send me to the barren lands of divine essence? A loud roar came from the man's body. At the instant he roared, the 300 figures on the ground lifted their heads and let out shocking roars at the same time. When are you going to send me to the barren lands of divine essence? These were the enraged roars of the 300 people. As they roared, the robes covering their heads were blown away by wind to reveal their hairless heads, along with the marks that were filled with the presence of shamans. These 300 people were the souls of Ninely. Once the battle against Morning Tao sect ends, I will personally send you to the barren lands of divine essence and help you search for your junior brother. If I go back on my word, then let Tianwu race bear the brunt of the destruction of our race. The face formed by lightning in the sky was silent for a moment before it looked at the large man with a trace of admiration and respect in its eyes as it spoke in a deep voice. All right, the headless man at the tip of the sword said in a muffled voice. Warriors of Ninely, we fight. Fight! The 300 people on the ground responded to him. Booming sounds surged into the sky, causing the lightning in the sky to tremble. Kill them. Damn you, you son of a B***tch. How dare you ambush me? I'll bite you to death. Enraged roars reverberated in the battlefield between Morning Tao sect and the Immortals Union. All the cultivators from Morning Tao sect in an area stared at a man they had surrounded in shock. The man was the height of 3 people. His body was incredibly thick and built, and he had endless strength, His tiger skin made him look like a ferocious beast in the shape of a tiger from the distance, but it also made him look like a tiger spirit. At that moment, he was biting down on a young cultivator he had seized with his right hand. As that person screamed shrilly in pain, he tore off a layer of flesh and blood. The man, whose mouth was filled with blood, threw his head back and laughed loudly. I don't even need to enter your dreams. I can kill all of you one by one, and you still dare to ambush me? If you really force me into a corner, I'll bring all of you into my dreams. With the cultivator in his hand, the man roared and rushed towards the people from Morning Dao sect. If he was just a reckless person, it would have been fine, but as he moved forward, runes continuously appeared under his feet. They overlapped with each other, causing divine abilities to continuously appear around him. There was also a screen of light protecting him, making it difficult for others to fight against him. Damn it, it's that person again. Just where did he come from? He looks like an idiot, but I've never seen an idiot with such skill in runes before. This person's runes can already manifest physical form. How are we supposed to surround and kill him? After a moment, the cultivators from Morning Dao sect in the small region swiftly retreated and left while feeling aggrieved. Their departure caused the people from the Immortals Union in the area to laugh loudly. Fellow Daoist Tiger, how many did you kill this time? That's right, fellow Daoist Tiger. Every time you rush out, you lure a group of people to you. I'll count this time. There should be 12 people, right? There were dozens of people from the Immortals Union in the area, and they were all looking at the man with smiles on their faces. The man in tiger skin had a smug expression on his face. He brought out a pot of wine from his bosom, and once he took a big swig from it, he roared loudly. I killed 14. He lifted the pot of wine and drank from it again. When he put it down, he was just about to speak smugly when his body suddenly shuddered, and he looked swiftly at a figure in the distance. It was a person dressed in a long black robe. He had long hair and held a long spear in his hand. He was a cultivator. He was not tall, but he stood tall. The man took a swift step forward and grabbed the cultivator's shoulder. When the cultivator turned his head around, a terrified expression appeared on his face. Lord, War Tiger, what is it? Get lost. Don't you dare wear black clothes in front of me in the future. Don't have such long hair, and don't use a spear. As the man roared, he pushed the cultivator away and began drinking again. However, no one saw that when he lifted his head, not only was wine flowing into his mouth, but there were also tears. Youngest junior brother, have you been well in the barren lands of divine essence? I miss you. If you like this work, I welcome you to give me a recommendation vote or a monthly vote. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1048. He grasped the flow of time and imprisoned old age. A period of time, a beautiful period, 5 years after Su Ming left Ninth Tribe. A buzzing sound echoed in the starry sky, and a group of two-headed scorpions roared through the starry sky. As the buzzing sound became sharper, they continued to chase after the two figures in front of them who seemed to be in a sorry state. They were a man and a woman. They were Su Ming and Su Hui. I told you a long time ago that we wouldn't take this path. You only said that after we took this path. I didn't. As the two of them fled, Su Hui's grumbling voice traveled into the distance. As her voice slowly left into the distance, their figures gradually disappeared from sight as the scorpions roared. 7 years, brand our figures on the souls of the galaxy, so that it will remember that the ripples of time were caused by a man and a woman called Su Ming and a woman called Su Hui. Enraged roars shook the galaxy. 3 gigantic, ferocious beasts hidden in space roared as they swam around the man and woman. The woman's face was pale, and she held the man's hand in a tight grip. This is the path we took after we listened to your suggestion. I was clearly talking about the other path. You didn't. Su Ming shook his head. When he closed his eyes, Ikang's projection swiftly manifested. At the instant the 3 void beasts were shocked, he grabbed Su Hui's hand and swiftly left into the distance. 10 years. Su Hui's figure swiftly manifested in the vast galaxy, as if she had appeared out of thin air. There was anxiety on her face, and once she appeared, she immediately lowered her head. The worry in her eyes was incredibly clear. As time passed, Su Hui's expression continued changing. She gritted her teeth and prepared to step into the vortex, but a hand suddenly stretched out from space. Su Hui quickly grabbed that hand and yanked it outwards. She immediately dragged Su Ming out of space. He was in a pathetic state, but he had grabbed a handful of black fur in his left hand. That fur was burning furiously, but Su Ming did not let go of it and throw it away. That's a ferocious beast equivalent to a master of fate, lives, and death. Why you? Su Hui immediately cried out in anger. So what if he's a master of fate, lives, and death? Su Ming smiled, and it affected the injuries on his body, but when he saw the black fur on his left hand, he laughed out loud. I can't use the whirlpool anymore, but if I choose to continue using it, then that will be the time I subdue you. Su Ming looked at the space under his feet. There was a vortex there, and enraged roars came from it. The 13th year in the Sea of Stars, there was a giant beast about 4,000 feet tall. The beast looked like a crocodile. If one took a closer look, they would see that it was a beast of the void that could fuse with the void. But now, atop the beast's head, was a tent. Light spread out from within the tent. There was a pearl inside, and it was this pearl that was shining with light. Su Ming was meditating inside, and Su Hui was doing the same beside him. Over the past 2 to 3 years, they somehow managed to subdue the void beast. Their journey had been smooth sailing. However, judging from the void beast's sorry state, it must have suffered a lot in the past. Moaning echoed in the quiet galaxy. It was the void beast's voice, and it grew more urgent with each passing moment. In the end, it was practically piercing to the ears. It's time to feed it. Su Ming, go feed it. Su Hui opened her eyes. It's always me. This time, it's your turn. This is my pet. I subdued it, Su Hui said smugly. Su Ming was silent. After some time, he shook his head, got up, and walked out of the tent. After a moment, the moaning disappeared. Su Ming returned to the tent, and when he saw the smiling Su Hui, he let out a cough. Strange. He only said these 2 words before he shook his head and fell silent. What's strange? Su Hui asked in surprise. It's nothing. Su Ming closed his eyes. Just what is strange? Su Hui blinked and asked again. Do you really want to know? Su Ming asked calmly with his eyes still closed. Hurry up and tell me. I'm curious. Why did this void beast grow so many moles over the past few years? Su Ming's face was expressionless. Once he finished speaking, he immersed himself in his meditation and did not even look at Su Hui's expression. The 17th year, at the edge of the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, there was a huge ring in the distance. That ring was formed by an endless amount of shining shattered planets and the ancestral cities of Divine Essence. They surrounded each other, causing that place to look like a galaxy. There was a thin, indistinct fog in there, along with countless stars. When a person saw it, they would be attracted to it, but if they looked at it for a long period of time, they would slowly see that the regions in the ring-shaped galaxy would change in shape as the fog filled the area. They would then turn into the outlines of ferocious beasts, which would surprise those who saw it. We've finally arrived at the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Su Ming stood on the void beast and looked into the distance. By his side, Su Hui's expression was solemn as well. Su Hui remained silent for a moment before she said softly, Heaven Traversers, Virtue Rooters, Rung Wus, and Dust Burners are the 4 venerated races in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean. They have existed for an unknown amount of years. With our strength, it'll be very difficult. I should say that it's impossible for us to even shake one of the venerated races. We'll have to try to know. Su Ming smiled faintly. When he lifted his right hand, he patted his storage bag, and a jade slip immediately appeared in his hand. He cast a few scrutinizing glances at it before he handed it to Su Hui. Follow the plan I told you previously. Wait for me at the spot marked on the map. 1 month later, we'll activate the rune. Su Ming turned his head sideways and looked at Su Hui. I want to go with you. Su Hui hesitated for a moment before she lifted her head and looked at Su Ming. If you go, who will activate the relocation rune? Su Ming shook his head. Then tell me what your plan is and why you want me to activate the relocation rune at the designated spot a month later. Su Hui looked at Su Ming. I want to give a huge gift to Heaven Traversers, who are the closest to this place. It's decided, Su Ming said calmly. With a single move, he turned into a long arc that charged into the distance. In an instant, he was already far away, leaving behind the void beast and Su Hui, who was watching him leave into the distance. Su Hui was silent for a moment. After a long while, she fused with space with the void beast and disappeared without a trace. She went to the spot marked on the map according to Su Ming's request. Su Ming turned into a long arc in the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean. As he charged forward, he spread his divine sense and swept the area. Everything in this place was incredibly unfamiliar. In fact, once Su Ming swept his divine sense through the place, he could sense that there were plenty of ferocious beasts in this place. However, most of them were asleep and rarely ventured out, which was why when he cast his gaze over the place, he found that it was quiet. Heaven Traversers. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. The description of Heaven Traversers from Djo Sha's Jade Slip appeared in his head. This was a race that worshipped the heavens and offered sacrifices. There were 100,000-something of them, and they lived a primitive life with heaven as their ruler. The divine abilities and arts they practiced were completely different from those of cultivators. They were similar to berserkers and shamans, but they had their own system of cultivation. However, even if their systems were different, once they reached a certain level of cultivation, their paths would be the same. They also had Lunar Culpa Realm, Solar Culpa Realm, and also had Masters of Fate, Lives, and Death. They believe in the will of heaven and believe that the heavens are their gods. As long as there is a sky, they cannot die and turn into a galaxy. Su Ming's eyes sparkled, and he became faster. They wear long blue robes, because to them, blue represents the sky, which is why they like it. Due to the large number of their people and the fact that the environment here is different from the world outside, Heaven Traversers have wings. The cold and fierce look in Su Ming's eyes became stronger. The winged Heaven Traversers were the masters of the sky. The contents recorded in Djo Sha's Jade Slip are things that happened 1,000 years ago. 1,000 years have passed since then, and I don't know how much Heaven Traversers have multiplied. 1,000 years might be short and not enough for a race to change, but I'll have to explore it a little before I can perfect my plan. Su Ming smiled coldly. With one move, his speed increased exponentially in the galaxy, and with one shift, he could travel an endless distance. Several days later, he completely stepped into the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean and into the territory of Heaven Traversers, which was marked on the map in the Jade Slip. Based on Djo Sha's understanding, Heaven Traversers controlled a total of 173 cultivation planets and 5,200-something floating continents that surrounded the northwestern part of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Even though the area they controlled was less than 1/10,000th of the entire inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, this area was enough for Heaven Traversers to be known as one of the 4 venerated races. After all, they were one of the 4 great tribes known to the world outside as the only ones who dared to live in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, because there were far more ferocious beasts in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, and they were much stronger than the tribes. The most dangerous thing in this place was not the tribes, but the ferocious beasts. The 4 venerated races are scattered in the inner part of Divine Essence Star Ocean, and the distance between them is very far. Heaven Traversers and Virtue Rooters are located in the northwest and southeast, respectively. Dust Burners are located at the center. As for the most mysterious Rongwu, they live completely at the center and live together with the powerful, ferocious beasts. The 4 venerated races have a way to communicate with each other so that they can communicate when to advance or retreat. Because of that, Heaven Traversers will be my first target. Today, I have come to take revenge for the fact that you chased after my master. Killing intent shone in Su Ming's eyes. With a single move, he charged towards a dark black cultivation planet before him. This planet was known as Outer Sky Planet, and it was the outermost planet belonging to Heaven Traversers. Boom! Su Ming charged towards the planet like a shooting star. Before he even closed in, he stirred up huge waves that surged into the sky. Layers of ripples spread through the galaxy, shaking the entire area, and booming sounds surged into the heavens. The violent sounds turned into a wave of impact that instantly pounced on the planet, causing the weather to change. Violent gusts of wind howled, and as the ground trembled, the seawater tumbled about, and trees were torn apart. Requesting recommendation votes to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1049. Green covered the entire Outer Sky Planet. As far as the eye could see, the forest was densely packed, and there was no end to it. Quite a number of trees that were 1,000 feet tall could be seen standing tall. From the distance, the gigantic tree crowns looked as if there were giants standing on the ground. There were also gigantic trees that were 10,000 feet tall, and the ancient air they gave off would make a person's heart rise. Further into the distance was a blue sea. As the waves tumbled about, it looked as if there were countless gigantic trees that were swaying under the sea. This was a cultivation planet filled with spirit energy. The essence of the world was so thick that all the lives in the planet would naturally possess faint power from the moment they were born. There were no cities, and neither were there any tribes. It was as if this was a peaceful planet that posed no threat whatsoever. However, if anyone took a closer look at the gigantic tree crowns in the forest, they would find that there were wooden houses under them. From time to time, winged figures would pass through these wooden houses. However, all of this silence was swiftly torn apart by the thunderous roars that came from the sky. Booming sounds surged into the sky, and the ground trembled. The trees swayed violently, and quite a number of them were even torn from the middle. The sea in the distance roared, and waves roared. The winged figures in the wooden houses immediately lifted their heads. Their eyes were originally light yellow, but at the instant they looked towards the sky, they instantly turned crimson. A ruthless aura swiftly erupted from the bodies of all the winged figures. Roars also tumbled out of their mouths. These sounds fused together and turned into a piercing roar that formed an impact that charged towards the sky, as if they wanted to fight against the source of the sound wave in the sky. As booming sounds shook the sky and earth, a burning shooting star appeared in the sky. That shooting star turned into a long arc that tore through the sky and charged towards the ground. The appearance of the long arc caused the eyes of the Heaven Traversers under the tree crowns to turn even redder. At the same time, they flew up, and, as they flapped their wings, they charged towards the place where the shooting star had come from. As the guardians of the outermost planets in the territory that belonged to Heaven Traversers, they were skilled in fighting and had a ruthlessness that was hidden in their bones. Usually, they would go out into the galaxy to hunt. If there was really such an ignorant beast that intruded into their star, then it would end up in their stomachs and become food. In fact, occasionally, there would be people from the tribes outside or cultivators from beyond Divine Essence Star Ocean who came to this place, but they would be torn apart and eaten alive. Almost all of them had done such a thing before, and they also liked the delicate flesh and blood smell of cultivators. The hundreds of Heaven Traversers were all traveling at an incredibly fast speed. As they charged forward, two old men flew out from the 10,000 feet tall tree behind them. These two people were dressed in long blue robes. Their faces were old, and the presence of those in the later stage of world plane realm spread out from their bodies. Anyone who dares to trespass the heaven-traversing domain shall die. One of the old men let out a cold harumph. He lifted his right hand and swung it forward. Immediately, the forest before him rustled, and countless leaves flew out to form a gigantic palm of leaves in midair. As it charged forward, it charged towards the spot where the shooting star had descended. Boom! A loud bang shook the ground. The shooting star landed on the ground, and as it rumbled, a wave of impact swept through the area. It lifted up the soil on the ground, lifted up many trees, and caused the ground in the distance to roar as it trembled. Su Ming slowly stood up from the deep pit that appeared on the ground. He was dressed in a sackcloth robe, and his long hair danced in the wind. His expression was aloof, and there was a freezing glare in his eyes. At the instant he stood up, piercing whooshing sounds came from the sky, and hundreds of heaven traversers arrived swiftly. Once they saw Su Ming, their eyes immediately sparkled. In their eyes, Su Ming was like a lost lamb. He was so fresh and tender that it was enough for the hundreds of them to take a bite of him, and the taste would linger in their mouths for a long time. Almost in an instant, the heaven traversers opened their mouths and revealed sharp, brownish-yellow teeth. From a certain perspective, they who lived in the inner parts of divine Essence Star Ocean had already assimilated with ferocious beasts and could no longer be considered humans. After all, the wings on their backs made it difficult for heaven traversers to be acknowledged by the cultivators beyond divine Essence Star Ocean. Almost at the instant the heaven traversers rushed towards Su Ming, the hand formed by countless leaves moved even faster than them. It shot past the heaven traversers with a bang and instantly appeared beside Su Ming to seize him. Su Ming lifted his head. His expression was as calm as ever. When the gigantic hand made of leaves closed in on him, he lifted his right hand, and without using his cultivation base, he threw a punch forward with just his physical power. Boom! A loud bang reverberated in the air, and Su Ming took a step back. As his robes fluttered, the hand crumbled and turned into an endless amount of leaves that instantly shattered and scattered in the area. This scene immediately caused the heaven traversers to stop moving. With a flap of their wings, they flew up together, and with hostile expressions, they glared at Su Ming. At the same time, the two old men closed in on him. At the first moment they saw Su Ming, their pupils shrank. The later stage of World Plane Realm. The two old men looked at each other. Which tribe are you from? What business do you have with heaven traversers? One of the old men asked coldly. His voice rolled in waves, and he spoke in a language that the cultivators could not understand, but Su Ming could. This language was similar to that of the berserkers and the shamans, but there were also differences. Su Ming had only managed to master it after spending some time in Djimo Sha's place. After all, he had a foundation in the berserkers' language, and he was not unfamiliar with the tribal society here. Su Ming did not speak. He flicked off the dust on his body, and a hint of a smile appeared at the corners of his lips. He took a step forward, and his body instantly became indistinct before he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was already in midair, right behind a heaven traverser. Careful! Almost at the moment the warning left his mouth, the young man from heaven traversers immediately shrank back. He did not flee forward, but instead rammed his body backwards. His wings were like sharp blades that sliced through the air behind him. This was the difference between heaven traversers and other tribes. They were a race that was good at fighting. Even a normal member of their tribe had an incredibly high amount of battle experience. But if their levels of cultivation were about the same, then this sort of action would be useful. But to Su Ming, even if this person's reaction was very quick, it was still useless. Blood poured down like rain. When shrill screams of pain rang out, Su Ming simply allowed the young man to crash into him and allowed his wings to slice through his skin. He seized the young man's neck with his right hand, and with a squeeze, a crack rang out. His neck was crushed, and his cultivation base rushed into his body to crush his nascent divinity. When he did so, enraged roars came from all around Su Ming, and the hundreds of heaven traversers instantly rushed towards him. You're asking for death. Killing intent shone in the eyes of the two old men in the later stage of World Plane Realm from heaven traversers at that moment. They were the fastest, and one of them rushed past his tribe members to appear beside Su Ming. When he lifted his right hand, it immediately turned into a withered tree. Branches spread out from it, and as they spread out, it was as if his arm had turned into a tree that rammed towards Su Ming. Su Ming's expression was calm. His cultivation-based clone and his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole instantly fused together, and his body was filled with the offensive power of those who had attained great completion in world plane realm. When he turned around, he lifted his right hand and formed a seal before he pointed at the old man's incoming tree arm through the air. With it, the old man's body froze. "I curse that 3 out of 10 heaven traversers will die," Su Ming said flatly. This was a curse he had mastered when he was in the land of berserkers. This art was too malicious, and Su Ming did not use it often. As his level of cultivation increased, when he executed this curse, its might would also be much greater than before. Almost at the same time, Su Ming said those words. His finger immediately turned black. A gust of black smoke instantly flew out from his fingertip, bringing with it a sense of decay and decay. In an instant, it touched the old man's tree arm, and the black smoke swiftly spread out. As the old man's expression changed drastically, it had already spread to half of his body. Su Ming no longer bothered with the old man. With a single move, he charged towards the heaven traversers who were rushing towards him. For a period of time, a rain of terror descended. Shrill screams of pain rang out nonstop, but Su Ming was so aloof that it was as if he had no emotions. He did not feel that he was bullying the weak because the difference in their levels of cultivation was too great. In fact, even if they were heaven traversers women, as long as they were among the hundreds of people, they would be treated as if they were killed by him. In the blink of an eye, there were already dozens of heaven traversers who had died in Su Ming's hands. As the expressions of the people around him changed, they were treated simultaneously. Only the other old man who had attained great completion in world plane realm charged towards Su Ming with a furious roar. His first step landed in the air, and the air rumbled and trembled. When his second step landed, his feet turned into trees, and when his third step landed, he raised his right hand and grabbed at the sky. A dark green whip instantly appeared, and as he swung it, cracking sounds echoed in the air. With his fourth step, his body turned into a long arc. When he closed in on Su Ming, the power of those who had attained great completion in world plane realm erupted from his body. At the same time his presence spread out, the entire cultivation planet looked as if it had fallen in love with him. All the trees swayed towards him, and the sea in the distance roared. As waves surged into the sky, they looked as if they were sending their power to him. To Su Ming, the old man who had just arrived felt as if he could affect the cultivation planet. It was as if the circulation of his blood was the waves and the rivers and oceans. The landing of his feet was the life force of the trees on the ground, and the beating of his heart was the signs of the cultivation planet's operations. Interesting, Su Ming smiled faintly. At the instant the old man closed in on him and the whip charged towards him, divine essence runic symbols appeared in Su Ming's eyes. Once divine essence runic symbols appeared, Su Ming's cultivation base erupted with a bang, and he rose straight from great completion in world plane realm to lunar culpa realm. Even though the shadow of the moon did not appear behind him, his current offensive power was that of lunar culpa realm. In the face of the incoming old man, Su Ming lowered his head, lifted his right hand, and threw a punch. His punch landed in the air, and booming sounds shook the heavens. The space in front of Su Ming immediately shattered and swept outwards layer by layer to turn into a whirlwind. In an instant, it crashed into the old man who seemed to have gathered the love of the planet on him, and he was instantly submerged. The ground trembled. The trees stopped moving simultaneously, and the roars of the sea seemed to have come to a stop. All the heaven traversers in the area stared at the blood dancing in the whirlwind with a dumbfounded expression. By their ears was a shrill cry that continued. "Who are you?" Not too far in the distance was the old man whose entire body was black and rotting, and he was cursed. With anger on his face, he roared, "I am Tian Xiezi's fourth disciple, Su Ming. I came to heaven traversers and asked for 30,000 of your kind souls to repay you for chasing down my master in the past." Su Ming pulled back his right hand, lifted his head, and spoke flatly. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come. and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 10:50. Run. Heaven Traversers, run into the forest. This person is not someone you can fight against. As the rotting old man roared, he did not retreat. Instead, he moved forward and charged toward Su Ming. The Heaven Traversers in the area were all shocked by the scene of Su Ming killing the other old man. Without any hesitation, they swiftly retreated and turned into long arcs that charged into the forest on the ground. Su Ming cast them a cold glance. Once he averted his gaze, it landed on the roaring old man, charging towards him. Unstable ripples of power were spreading out from his body at that moment. His eyes were bloodshot, and a rotten stench wafted out from his body. Judging by his crazed look, it was clear that he wanted to self-destruct to hold Su Ming back. Su Ming lifted his right hand, and a gourd immediately appeared on his palm. 5 colors circulated around it, and Su Ming swiped his left hand over it. "Treasure, please kill them." Once he said these words, an eye immediately appeared on the gourd. It blinked, and a small humanoid holding a sharp blade flew out from the mouth of the gourd. It turned into a stream of light that instantly chased after the fleeing Heaven Traversers. At the same time, the old man closed in on Su Ming. As his body swelled up in a bizarre manner, a loud bang rang out from his body. He had clearly chosen to self-destruct. As his body exploded, a destructive ripple instantly spread through the area. The ground trembled, and the sky roared. This was the self-destruction of a cultivator who had attained great completion in World Plane Realm. If the power of his self-destruction spread out, it could destroy the entire planet. But the old man had used some unknown method to limit the power of his self-destruction to a certain area. Because of it, that area would shatter and turn into an eternal black hole in the world. The black hole would cause great damage to the planet, but since the power of self-destruction was limited, it would not cause the planet to shatter. The world lost its color. The wind and clouds surged. The destructive power from the self-destruction instantly drowned Su Ming, and the old man's head also disappeared. Before he died, there was a ferocious smile on his lips. Even some of the fleeing Heaven Traversers on the ground lifted their heads. When they looked at the self-destruction in the sky, hatred appeared in their eyes. Su Ming's expression remained as calm as ever. He was not afraid of his enemy's self-destruction. Almost at the instant the destructive power spread through his body, he lifted his right hand and drew a circle before him. Between the past and the future is the present. The Abyss Builder's inborn art was immediately executed when he swung his right hand. As his level of cultivation increased, Su Ming could execute his race's inborn ability with even more ease. What he wanted to change was not the old man who had already died, but the world within 30 feet around him. As a destructive power continued destroying the world, it was reversed by Su Ming's inborn ability, causing it to remain in the flow of time. After a moment, when the destructive ripples disappeared, what appeared before all the Heaven Traversers' eyes was Su Ming, who was not affected in the slightest, standing in the sky with his aloof eyes. Almost at the instant those Heaven Traversers saw Su Ming, screams of pain reverberated in the air. Those were the attacks of the small human from a gourd. It was so quick that it instantly beheaded 3 people. When the screams of pain rang out, the Heaven Traversers fled even faster. The shock they felt at that moment could not be described with words. In their eyes, the strength of the intruder this time had already surpassed their imaginations. Blood poured down from the sky. Su Ming stood in the sky and watched the Heaven Traversers' heads fly into the air. His expression was aloof, and there was not a hint of pity on them. He had come here today to kill. Even if they were weak and did not have the power to fight against him. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame themselves for being Heaven Traversers. If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the powerful warriors in their race for chasing after Su Ming's master in the past. If no one offends me, then I will not offend them. You might not have offended me, but if I did nothing even though I knew that someone had chased after my master's life in the past, then I would be calling myself a disciple in vain. Heaven traversers, I will make you pay. As Su Ming mumbled under his breath, the slaughter on the ground came to an end. Only 4 heaven traversers were the fastest. As their screams of pain echoed in the air, they fled into the forest. A glint appeared in the eyes of the small person from the gourd. When he lifted his head to look at Su Ming, he charged forward and disappeared into the gourd. Once the small person flew into the gourd, the buzzing sound from the gourd echoed in Su Ming's heart. Not enough. Replenish. You can activate the 2nd level of the divine art. Su Ming put away the gourd and walked toward the ground, towards the forest. He wanted to kill all the heaven traversers in the area, and the 4 who had escaped would not be able to escape death. However, at the instant Su Ming was about to step into the forest, he suddenly frowned. An incredibly thick wave of life force erupted from the cultivation planet, the ground, the ocean in the distance, and the endless forest. The life force was so thick that it nearly gained corporeal form. It turned into a large layer of fog that enveloped the forest. That fog did not spread outwards, but instead surrounded the forest to form a layer of protection. That protection was so strong that Su Ming could tell with just his senses that he would need the power of Solar Culpa Realm to break it. As expected of one of the 4 venerated races, the defense of this planet alone is already so strong. Looks like those heaven traversers were careless just now, or else if they had holed up in this place, they would have caused me a lot of trouble. Su Ming swept his gaze across the fog in the forest. The entire cultivation planet is rejecting my existence. Heaven traversers have already obtained the planet's acknowledgement. If I want to kill them, it will be the same as me going up against this cultivation planet. That old man's divine ability, just now, was the same. That was the power of Kismet gathered on him after he obtained the planet's acknowledgement. Su Ming remained silent for a moment before a cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips. He lifted his right foot and stomped on the forest beneath him. His body immediately sank down. Once he touched the fog, Su Ming's cultivation base erupted from his body. As booming sounds reverberated in the air, he forced his way into the fog and landed on the forest floor. The fog around him was so thick that it made him feel as if he was in seawater. The fog around him was so thick that he felt as if he was in seawater. It was as if his movements were surrounded by countless threads, making it difficult for him to even move. The grass on the ground was wrapped tightly around Su Ming's legs. As the trees around him swayed, they blocked Su Ming's gaze. The sky darkened, the ground trembled irregularly, the seawater roared, and even the air he could breathe instantly became scarce. All of this was due to the cultivation planet rejecting Su Ming. If this cultivation planet had intelligence, and it was alone, then its disgust towards Su Ming would have reached its peak. Since you don't like me, then there's no need for you to continue existing. Su Ming could sense that the planet loathed him and rejected him. With a cold sneer, he lifted his right hand slowly and pushed it against the ground. When he closed his eyes, wisps of red smoke appeared on his right index finger. The red smoke increased and gradually gathered together to form a ring. After a moment, a red ring appeared on Su Ming's right index finger. The ring's red color was the color of blood, and it shone with a strange light. At the instant it appeared on Su Ming's finger, a thick power of the curse erupted from him and surged into the ground through his right hand. This ring was Su Ming's treasure. It was the origin of his curse. Since the planet rejected Su Ming, then Su Ming chose to curse it. He cursed it for its destruction. If the planet was destroyed, then it would no longer possess a thick amount of life force. If it did not have life force, then it would no longer be able to provide protection. In fact, Su Ming had another thought in his mind. He wanted to know whether the planet would absorb the life force of the heaven traversers to replenish itself when its life force was about to wither away. Su Ming smiled faintly. A freezing glare shone in his eyes, and the power of the curse spreading out from his right hand continued spreading through the ground. The ground trembled, the trees swayed as if they were roaring, the seawater roared, and thunder rumbled in the sky. I cursed the earth to shatter. As Su Ming spoke, The red ring on his finger started shining like a red eye. Immediately, cracks appeared on the ground where Su Ming had pressed his palm down. They continued spreading out, and in the blink of an eye, they spread in all directions. "I curse the trees to wither," Su Ming said flatly. Immediately, the trees around him started withering rapidly. Wails that were silent, but Su Ming could hear reverberated in the air. "I curse the seas to run dry and the stones to rot. I curse the life force to dissipate." Su Ming pushed his right hand against the ground, and the planet immediately roared. A huge rebound force bounced back at him from the ground, the sky, the forest, and the sea. All of these forces came crashing towards him at the same time. It was as if it wanted to chase away the curse and send it into Su Ming's body so that the curse would turn against him. Su Ming smiled coldly. He lifted his right hand swiftly and seized the withered grass under his feet. With both hands, he quickly weaved the withered grass together. In just the span of 10 breaths, a round ball of withered grass was formed. In Su Ming's eyes, that ball looked like a cultivation planet. He bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood on the grass ball. Then, with the ball in his right hand, he pushed it against the ground again. "I curse this planet to perish." Su Ming's voice was calm, but at the instant he spoke, if anyone looked towards Heaven Traverser's outer sky planet from the galaxy, they would be able to see that the green planet was rapidly turning gray. As that gray spread out, the ground roared and cracked countless times. The trees withered and decayed, and the water vapor from the sea evaporated, turning in a black rain that fell on the ground. In the blink of an eye, a cultivation planet brimming with life turned into a decaying state that made it seem as if it had died. "I curse this planet's sky to become dark from now on." In a withered forest, Su Ming lifted his head. "In the morning, I heard the news about a magnitude 7 earthquake in Sichuanxia. I hope that all my readers there will be safe. To be continued. If you like this work, please come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 1051. The ball of dried grass in his hand was now yellow and withered, as if it would shatter with the slightest touch. At the instant Su Ming lifted his head and spoke, black clouds swiftly appeared in the sky under the illumination of the black rain. They spread to the horizon, causing the ground to be instantly enveloped in darkness. The cracks on the ground grew larger. The trees withered and turned into dust. The sea in the distance turned into a basin, and within it was an endless amount of mud and withered plants. An aura of death gradually spread out from the withered trees, the bottom of the basin, and the ground. Once it fused together, it turned into a thick aura. Su Ming looked at his surroundings. When he cast his gaze over the area, he saw nothing but decay. In fact, he could even see dozens of Heaven Traversers running away while wailing in pain. Clearly, not all of the Heaven Traversers had moved out. At that moment, these dozens of people were rapidly withering away. Regardless of whether they were willing or not, a large amount of their life force was swiftly sucked out of their bodies. It was absorbed by the ground, or perhaps more accurately speaking, it was absorbed by the dying cultivation planet. It could acknowledge the Heaven Traversers living on it, but similarly, when it needed it, not only would it take away their acknowledgement, it would also take away their life force. Su Ming looked at the dozens of Heaven Traversers. He watched as they screamed in pain and turned into skin and bones after running for less than several hundreds of feet. When all their life force was sucked away, they turned into dust. However, the life force of these Heaven Traversers was just a drop in the bucket to the gigantic cultivation planet. It could only allow them to live for a few breaths under Su Ming's curse. 10 breaths later, the cracks no longer appeared on the ground. The trees stopped withering, and the basin at the bottom of the sea in the distance sank into silence. Only the black rain continued falling from the sky, and the black clouds covered all the light. This was a dead planet. The stench of decay and the aura of death filled the entire place, causing all those who came here for the first time to think that this was a planet that had died for an unknown period of time. Su Ming lifted his right hand. The ball of dry grass in his hand had already turned into powder. Once it was drenched by the black rain, it flowed through the gaps between Su Ming's fingers and fell on the ground. "It's about time." Su Ming sat down cross-legged and swung his right hand. Once he flung away the drenched powder, he pushed his hand gently towards the ground. He lifted his hand and pressed down again, maintaining a certain rhythm. Once then again. When Su Ming pushed his hand down 9 times, the cracks on the ground started closing up right before his eyes. After a moment, when anyone looked over, not a single crack could be seen on the ground of the cultivation planet. When Su Ming struck the tree 18 times, the withered trees suddenly turned into illusions. As they disappeared, trees brimming with life force appeared. After a moment, the entire cultivation planet was covered in green once more, making it seem as if the trees had never withered before. The forest was endless, and life force continued to flow endlessly through it. When Su Ming slapped his palm 27 times, the sea in the distance was enveloped by a hazy illusion. Soon after, the seawater tumbled about, and in an instant, the basin that had lost its seawater regained a vast sea. The dark clouds in the sky also started changing rapidly as Su Ming continued striking the ground. When Su Ming struck the ground for the 36th time, the dark clouds disappeared, and the clear sky and bright sunlight appeared before their eyes once again, along with the land. The black rainwater also turned clear. When it fell on the ground, it stirred up a curtain of rain, causing the cultivation planet to look as beautiful as it was before. "They're here. It's a pity that they're not Heaven Traverser's progenitor." Su Ming's right hand came to a stop on the ground. When he lifted his head, he spoke faintly, and a loud bang immediately came from the sky. As it did so, 3 long arcs instantly closed in. They did not appear from the distance, but as if they had walked out of space, they appeared in the sky above the planet. Of the 3 people, 2 were men and 1 was a woman. They looked to be in their 40s and were dressed in dark blue long robes. As their wings spread open, streams of light flowed around them. Their hair danced in the wind, and an astonishing power spread out from their bodies. In fact, if anyone took a closer look, they would be able to see the shadow of a moon between the wings on their backs. These were 3 powerful warriors in lunar Culpa realm. One of the men had the shadow of the moon in water, and the other had the shadow of the moon in fire. As for the woman, she had the shadow of a moon formed by petals behind her. Regardless of which race it was, those in lunar Culpa realm were the core power, and it was the same even for the venerated Heaven Traversers. These 3 people were clearly people with incredibly high statuses in Heaven Traversers. At the instant they appeared in the sky, the 3 of them immediately looked towards the ground, and they were stunned. We received a call for help saying that a powerful enemy had invaded this place, but it's so calm now. I also sensed the ripples of death spreading out from the galaxy just now, but right now, this place is filled with life force. The 3 of them looked at each other. A glint appeared in the woman's eyes, and she lifted her right hand to wipe her eyes. She closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, the ground was still filled with forest. There was nothing unusual about it. It's not an illusion. While the 3 of them were hesitating, dozens of figures charged up from the ground. Those people were Heaven Traversers. They moved forward swiftly and charged towards the 3 people. The 3 of them instantly looked over. Just what happened? Where are Zaydu and Han Duo, the 2 garrison elders? The man with the shadow of the moon in water behind him shouted with a frown. Once he said those words, the dozens of Heaven Traversers immediately had a spirited look appear on their faces. Are the ferocious beasts or the people from other tribes who invaded Heaven Traversers? The other man asked, as his words echoed in the air. The dozens of Heaven Traversers' expressions of life became even stronger, and they looked no different from before they died. Only the woman's expression changed. Just as she was about to speak, a loud bang suddenly came from the sky, and 4 long arcs flew towards them. The appearance of these 4 long arcs immediately caught the people's attention. Su Ming, who was sitting cross-legged in the forest, also looked over. There were 4 cultivators, and all of them were men who looked to be in their 30s. They were not too far away from each other, and it was clear that they were part of a team. Once they appeared, they immediately froze in midair. As shock and bewilderment appeared on their faces, the 4 of them gathered together. I am Xian Shang, a cultivator from beyond the galaxy. I am good friends with the tribe leader of Dust Burners, Lu Ka. We were invited to the galaxy by him, and this is our token. However, we ran into some difficulties on our way here and happened to pass by this place. We didn't know that this is Heaven Traverser's territory, so please don't blame us. We will leave now. We will leave now. The person who spoke was the man dressed in a long, dark green robe. There was a smile on his face, and he looked incredibly polite. As he spoke, he brought out a black piece of wood from his bosom. With a swing of his arm, flames immediately rose from the wood. Those flames were green, and they looked like will-o'-the-wisps. What spread out from them was not hot air, but cold frost. The 4 cultivators all had extraordinary levels of cultivation. By the looks of it, they were in the later stage of World Plane Realm. If they were in Divine Essence Star Ocean, they could support an entire family on their own, and they could also discuss some conditions with the forces of power from the 4 great true worlds keeping a lookout over the galaxy. However, in Divine Essence Star Ocean, which was filled with alien races, they were incredibly cautious in their actions. Their words were filled with politeness, as if they were afraid of causing a misunderstanding. In truth, the 4 of them had indeed happened to pass by this place, just as they had said. They did not come from Western Ring Nebula, but had come from different galaxies, and they were prepared to take the risk to enter the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean. Their journey had been full of twists and turns, and they had spent nearly 100 years going through all sorts of dangers. Their group of 7 had been reduced to their current group of 4, and they had finally reached this place after much difficulty. When they saw Heaven Traverser's outer sky planet, they hesitated for a moment before they decided to rest in this place. However, they did not expect that they would run into alien races in this place. The man who spoke just now clearly understood the alien races in Divine Essence Star Ocean, which was why when he saw Heaven Traverser's wings, he was able to recognize them at first glance. They were Heaven Traversers, one of the 4 venerated races. As the 4 of them retreated, they quickly sent divine thoughts to each other. They were already prepared to immediately fight back if Heaven Traversers intercepted them. The 3 strongest Heaven Traversers might have given them the feeling that they were in Lunar Culpa Realm, but the cultivators who dared to step into the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean would definitely not easily enter unless they had powerful enchanted treasures and divine abilities. It would be impossible for them to step into the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean, and they might even die on the way. Su Ming swept his gaze past the 4 cultivators in the forest. He could see their fatigue, and he could tell that their words were not false. However, if there was no great temptation, no one would be willing to take such a risk and step into the inner parts of Divine Essence Star Ocean. These 4 people must surely have other secrets. The 2 men in Lunar Culpa Realm in the sky frowned, but when they heard Dust Burner's tribe leader's name, they were momentarily stunned. When they saw the token he brought out, they averted their gazes and no longer bothered themselves with the 4 cultivators. The 4 of them immediately retreated, wanting to stay far away from this troublesome place. They could vaguely tell that the Heaven Traverser's expressions were hostile, as if something had happened. No matter what it was, the 4 of them did not want to get involved in it. But at the instant they were about to leave, the expression of the woman among the 3 in Lunar Culpa Realm changed a few times. With one move, she chased after the 4 of them and spoke in an urgent tone. There's something wrong with these 4. We can't let them leave. The woman left in an instant, and the expressions of the 4 cultivators changed. As they fled at full speed, the 2 Heaven Traversers in Lunar Culpa Realm frowned. It was clear that they did not understand their companion's actions, but they still instinctively chased after her. Su Ming sighed in the forest on the ground. There are still some flaws in the illusion of stars, sun, and moon formed by the power that exists just by believing in it. If these 4 people hadn't appeared to serve as a contrast between the illusion and reality, then this flaw wouldn't have been obvious. Su Ming shook his head. He already knew that the woman had seen some clues, but she did not dare say it out loud, due to her shock and bewilderment. That was why she chased after them, intending to leave the dead cultivation planet. Since you're already here, then don't leave, Su Ming said flatly. He stood up, and at the instant he did so, the cultivation planet that was brimming with life immediately turned into a withered and dead planet in the blink of an eye. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1052. As the ground withered and died, the pupils of the 3 heaven traversers in lunar Culpa realm shrank, and their bodies froze in midair. That pause was clearly not their intention, but their feet had started withering away at that instant. It was as if their feet were withering and dying together with the planet's ground. At the instant their expressions changed drastically, all the trees in the cultivation planet withered and shattered, returning to their dead state. Soon after, a large amount of the 3 heaven traversers' skin sunk in, and in the blink of an eye, their hair fell off. As their skin rapidly withered away, they looked as if they were just skin and bones. Disbelief appeared in the trio's eyes, and without any hesitation, they wanted to flee, but the seawater in the distance roared. At the instant an indistinct air appeared, the seemingly vast sea turned into a deep basin in the blink of an eye. The rotting mud in it let out a foul stench, and as if it was attracted by the basin, a large amount of black spots immediately appeared on the skin of the 3 heaven traversers in the sky. Black blood flowed out of those spots, and it was a terrifying sight to behold. What is this divine ability? Everything just now was fake, and everything right now is also fake. Don't look at the ground of the planet. Hurry up and leave. Step into the galaxy. Once we reach the galaxy, this person's art will naturally lose its effect. This was clearly the first time the trio had encountered such a strange divine ability. At that moment, the wings on their backs flapped, and their cultivation bases erupted from their bodies. They turned into 3 long arcs that charged into the sky. The 4 cultivators not too far in the distance were already shocked by this scene. Their expressions changed swiftly, and, as they retreated, they also swiftly flew into the sky. Yet at that moment, Su Ming's aloof voice came from the withering ground and stood up. I curse the color of the sky to turn black from now on. When he said those words, the sky roared, and the originally clear sky was instantly torn apart. All of this had been a veil covering the truth, and at that moment, the veil was lifted to reveal the sky filled with rolling black clouds. I curse the rain that will descend to be dust that will make the ground rot. When Su Ming spoke again, black rain immediately poured down from the sky. It was incredibly corrosive, and when it landed on a person's body, they would feel intense pain, as if they were about to be pierced through. The 3 powerful heaven traversers in lunar Culpa realm were immediately blocked by the black clouds. At the instant the sky changed color, the feathers on their wings fell off. Waves of black smoke surrounded them, as if they were being corroded. The trio's expressions were incredibly dark. They looked around and saw everything on the planet, the skeletons on the ground, and the dozens of withered corpses of heaven traversers smiling at them. These corpses floated in midair, staring at them as if they were alive. Who are you? She glared at Su Ming on the ground, who had his head lifted and was looking at them. You're right, the woman said in a shrill voice. His long hair fluttered in the wind, while a purple glow vaguely appeared in his eyes. His expression was calm, but the purple line between his eyebrows could not hide the demonic aura that was being emitted from his body. You're the one who saw through the weakness in my illusion. Su Ming smiled faintly. However, when that smile landed in all the people's eyes, it turned into a chill, especially the 4 cultivators. Their expressions were filled with respect. They surrounded each other and stared at Su Ming warily. The 4 of them groaned in their hearts. They had originally intended to rest in this place, but they had run into heaven traversers. They had only managed to deceive them after much difficulty, but they did not expect that they would run into another person who looked even more terrifying than Heaven Traversers. Judging by this person's clothes, he did not look like a cultivator, but they could not tell which tribe in Divine Essence Star Ocean he belonged to. He's just a cultivator who has attained great completion in World Plane Realm. If the three of us attack at full power, as long as we kill him, we will be able to break the illusory seal in this place. A glint appeared in the woman's eyes. When she spoke, she moved and charged towards Su Ming from the sky. The two men behind her gritted their teeth and had their power in lunar Culpa realm erupt from their bodies. An illusory water moon and a burning fire moon appear behind them. The two of them took a step forward and turned in a long arcs that charged towards Su Ming. Is this an illusion? Su Ming asked faintly. It's a feast prepared for your progenitor. Now, the three of you can take your seats early. You are in a starving planet that is about to die. These three people's life force can allow you to recover quite a lot. Do you want to protect the Heaven Traversers you acknowledge, or absorb the life force of the living beings you acknowledge? This is your choice. Su Ming smiled. That smile was incredibly evil. He was not a person who had been acknowledged by the planet, which was why it was difficult for it to form a connection with him and absorb his life force through this connection. But it was different for Heaven Traversers. Once Su Ming said those words, a weak buzzing sound that was tinged with anger came from the ground and reverberated in the world. Su Ming could hear that roar, and so could all the people around him. It was the spirit of the planet roaring as it struggled. As the roars reverberated in the air and the three people in the sky closed in, Su Ming laughed. His laughter fused with the roars from the ground, bringing with it a domineering air as well as a malicious air that surged into the sky. Almost at the instant he laughed, the roars from the ground grew louder, but the expressions of the three people coming from the sky changed drastically. Their bodies were rapidly withering away, and their life force was being absorbed by the sky in an unseen manner at a speed they could not believe. It was as if they had become the strongest form of rejection from the planet at that moment. This was not Su Ming attacking them, but the spirit of the planet devouring them for the sake of survival. It devoured all existences that it acknowledged and acknowledged. If it was a normal cultivator, then their bodies and souls would immediately be destroyed under this devouring. But as powerful warriors in Lunar Culpa realm, they had the right to fight against this devouring, but the prerequisite for them to do so was to cut off the connection with the planet that had acknowledged them. The 100-something planets belonging to Heaven Traversers had a strange connection with Heaven Traversers since ancient times. This connection was an agreement that they had agreed to. The planets would provide what Heaven Traversers needed for their cultivation, and Heaven Traversers would provide protection and time for the spirit of the planet to grow. Yet on that day, this connection that had existed for a long time was completely cut off as the three Heaven Traversers roared in anger. As powerful warriors in Lunar Culpa realm, when the three of them worked together, they had the right to break off the agreement with the planet. I, Song Yin, son of La Sonya, represent La Sonya's line and break off the agreement with the planet beyond the sky. I, Dong Ming, son of Dong Nuo, represent Dong Nuo's line and break off the agreement with the planet beyond the sky. I, son of Yin Difei, represent Yin Difei's line and break off the agreement with the planet if I can. As their bodies withered away, struggle appeared on the faces of the three powerful warriors in Lunar Culpa realm. They pressed their right hands against the center of their brows and their left hands against their chests before they spoke through gritted teeth. At the instant they spoke, there was a sorrowful tone in the roar from the ground. It reverberated through the entire cultivation planet, and the suction force surrounding the three people swiftly disappeared. Su Ming smiled and shook his head. He took a step forward, and with a shift, he instantly appeared in front of the man with the water moon. He lifted his right hand, clenched his fist, and threw a punch forward. At the instant Su Ming hurled his fist forward, divine essence runic symbols appeared in his eyes, causing the will of Lunar Culpa realm to erupt from Su Ming's fist even though he was still in great completion of World Plane realm when he hurled his fist forward. The man with the water moon retreated swiftly. A ferocious expression appeared on his face, and the shadow of the water moon shot through his body and charged toward Su Ming. In the blink of an eye, the water moon crashed into Su Ming's fist. Boom! The man with the water moon coughed up blood and was sent flying backwards like a kite with its string snapped. Su Ming swayed and took 2 steps back. When he lifted his head, the fighting spirit in his eyes grew stronger, as expected of heaven traversers of the venerated race. A large amount of your life force has been sucked away and your inner organs have been corroded by the curse, but you still managed to bring forth such power of lunar Culpa realm. Su Ming smiled. At the same time, the other 2 heaven traversers in lunar Culpa realm closed in on him from 2 different directions. The shadows of the fire moon and the flower moon became the brightest source of light in the dark world at that moment. The divine essence runic symbols in Su Ming's eyes shone, and they immediately rose and fell on his body, causing his cultivation base to rise once again. At the same time, a presence appeared around Su Ming's body. It was Ekang's presence. The appearance of this presence caused Su Ming's offensive power to reach a breakthrough once again in lunar Culpa realm. He took a step forward, and with an indescribable speed, he instantly appeared behind the retreating man with the water moon. He seized the man's wings with both hands and yanked them. As the man screamed in pain, Su Ming tore his wings from his body. As blood gushed out, Su Ming moved again. He lifted his right hand, and with lightning speed and power equivalent to those in solar Culpa realm, he tapped the back of the man with the water moon's head. With a bang, the man's head exploded. At the instant his nascent divinity exploded, his nascent divinity left his body and fled swiftly. Su Ming looked over coldly. "The 4 of you cultivators, do you want to live?" Once Su Ming said these words, the faces of the 4 cultivators who had been watching the entire time immediately turned pale. Conflict appeared on their faces, but soon they gritted their teeth and instantly chased after the nascent divinity of the Water Moon tribe member who had fled. The person called Xianshang was the fastest among the 4. With a flash, he struck his forehead and spat out a pearl. That pearl instantly charged towards the nascent divinity of the man with the water moon's head. It closed in on him in an instant and crashed into his nascent divinity. With a bang, the nascent divinity let out a shrill cry, and the pearl exploded into a huge net that enveloped the nascent divinity. "Why you?" Xianshang's face was pale. Clearly, he had used his full strength in that attack just then. At that moment, he let out a low shout, and a glint appeared in the eyes of a man in white beside him. He charged towards the nascent divinity of the man with the water moon's head. When he closed in, he lifted his right hand, and a crack instantly appeared on it. Soul's ceiling. The crack was like a gaping mouth. At the instant it pressed down on the nascent divinity, the man with the water moon's shrill screams came to an abrupt halt, and his nascent divinity was instantly devoured by the hand. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1053. Su Ming did not bother himself with the 4 cultivators' actions. If they wanted to live, they had a hand over proof of their loyalty. If they did not want to offend Heaven Traversers and did not want to provoke Su Ming, then their lives would be in Su Ming's hands. If they wanted to blame someone, then they could only blame their bad luck. They should not have come to this place at this moment. Since they were already here, then they could not struggle. They had to make a choice. When Su Ming heard the shrill cries from the water moon's nascent divinity, he knew the 4 cultivators' choice, but he did not look at them. Instead, he charged towards the moon of fire and the moon of flowers. This was a fight where their levels of cultivation were not equal. Ekang's presence spread out from Su Ming's body, and its power circulated through his entire body, causing him to possess offensive abilities equivalent to those in Solar Culpa realm. Even though it was only equivalent and not a true Solar Culpa realm, it could still make Su Ming the strongest under Solar Culpa realm. As he stared at the man and woman charging towards him, Su Ming narrowed his eyes. He did not retreat, but instead moved forward. He lifted his right hand and formed a seal. Once he touched the center of his brows, he pointed at the moon of fire that was the closest to him. The life matrix of midwinter is the beginning of my life. With it, moaning, freezing wind immediately stirred up in the world under the black clouds. In it, the world looked as if it had been sealed in ice. Snow appeared, but it was not white but black. The black snow floated in the air, causing the black rain to turn into ice crystals. As it spread out in all directions, a piercing cold will froze the entire area. The incoming fire moon let out cracking sounds and was instantly frozen by Su Ming's finger. The fire moon empress also froze the man who was glaring at the incoming moon of fire. The man roared and struggled. In fact, at the instant he was sealed in ice, he brought out a large amount of enchanted treasures and even executed his divine abilities to fight against the ice. But all his enchanted treasures, all his divine abilities, and his enraged roars were instantly sealed in ice under midwinter. This was Su Ming's life matrix art, the power of midwinter. After winter, crimson is the main color. This red is autumn, the peak of the red of autumn. When Su Ming said those words flatly, he pointed at the moon of flowers with his right hand. At the instant Su Ming pointed at the moon formed by an endless amount of flowers, it immediately withered and turned yellow. In the blink of an eye, the red of autumn appeared on it, causing the woman's expression to change and turn pale. This was a divine ability that she could not fight against. It was a transformation of an art she had never seen before. Midwinter and red autumn were originally the transformations of the 4 seasons. But when Su Ming executed them, the woman felt as if he was the 4 seasons in the universe. The changing of the 4 seasons was done with ease and without the slightest bit of abruptness. It was as if the heavens and earth were supposed to be like this. It was as if the 4 seasons were supposed to be controlled by the man in front of her. After possessing a king, the cultivation-based clone has reached the later stage of world plane realm, and the physical body of the clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole has reached perfection. All of these are like the light summer at the start of autumn. As they brew and accumulate power, they will erupt with the flames of life that are exuberant in the scorching summer. Right now, this flame is not strong. This flame is only a ball of fire, but this flame of life is the scorching sun that burned the universe when I walked through midwinter. Su Ming lifted his head. When he lifted his hands, his hair danced in the air, making him look as if he was swaying in flames. His body also looked as if it had been set ablaze at that moment. That was the flame of his life. It was the flame that had walked on Su Ming's body from midwinter to red autumn, and then from red autumn to light summer. When that flame reached its strongest state, it would mean that Su Ming had completely entered his life's summer. At that time, what awaited Su Ming would be the final step in his life, the spring when all manner of life would be revived. The revival of all manner of life would also mean that he would rise to power, and it would also mean rebirth. Once that time came, Su Ming would be reborn, and it would be the eruption of his life at its peak. This step was already not far away. At the instant the light summer flame burned on Su Ming's body, he formed a seal with his hands and swung them outwards. Immediately, a sea of fire erupted from his body and spread outwards with loud booming sounds. In the blink of an eye, it devoured the frozen fire moon, surrounded the withered red flower moon, and enveloped the heaven traversers man and woman within it. There were no shrill screams of pain, neither were there any shocking booms. However, the sea of fire burning in the black snow that filled the sky dyed the area red. The scene of winter, autumn, and summer fusing together was an even stronger impact than any boom or shrill screams. It caused the hearts of the 4 cultivators in the distance to tremble, and their breathing quickened. When the sea of fire disappeared, Su Ming stood alone in midair with a calm expression. The fire moon and flower moon were no longer around him, and neither were the figures of the man and woman. These two people had already been burned to a crisp by Su Ming's flame of life. The entire cultivation planet was in silence at that moment. After a long while, when Su Ming's gaze landed on the four cultivators, they immediately bowed towards him with respect on their faces. "Tell me your names," Su Ming said flatly. "I am Xianshang. Greetings, Senior." "I am Huayu. Greetings, Senior." "I am Yinyu. Greetings, Senior." "I am Yining. Greetings, Senior." The hearts of the four people had been intimidated by Su Ming's divine ability just then, and they had also been suppressed by the might he had displayed. At that moment, when they lowered their heads and bowed to him, they told him their names. "Why have you come to Star Ocean?" Su Ming's voice was flat. Once he swept his gaze past the four people, his eyes landed on Xianshang, who had brought out the keepsake from the tribe leader of Dust Burners. Xianshang hesitated for a moment before he said in a low voice, "We were invited by Dust Burners' tribe leader to go to Dust Burners for some private matters." From the first moment he saw Su Ming, he had never thought that he was a cultivator. Even now, he still thought that Su Ming was a powerful warrior from some tribe in Divine Essence Star Ocean. Even if three people beside him thought the same. After all, Su Ming's clothes, temperament, and the indescribable feeling he gave off were no different from the people from Star Ocean tribe they had seen before. If he was a cultivator, then the feeling that he could not fuse with the entire Divine Essence Star Ocean and that he seemed to be an independent existence might be covered up with some methods, but if someone wanted to, they would still be able to see some clues. However, the four of them could not see anything from Su Ming. "Oh." Su Ming smiled. When the four people saw his smile, they immediately felt their skin crawl. That smile was nothing, but when Su Ming smiled, the purple line at the center of his brows seemed to squirm a little, as if a small crack had opened up. A feeling as if they were being watched instantly rose in the four people's hearts. That feeling made them feel as if they were instantly naked, and not a single secret could be hidden. All of them were seen clearly by the thin crack at the center of Su Ming's brows. In fact, the four of them had a strong feeling that there seemed to be an eye in the thin crack at the center of Su Ming's brows. "I was just about to pay a visit to Dust Burners. Fellow Taoists, is it convenient for me to come with you?" The ghost of a smile appeared on Su Ming's lips, but the piercing cold in his eyes caused all those who saw it to feel their hearts clench. There was no way the four of them would dare to say that it was not convenient. Even though they were unwilling to do so, they had to smile and nod. "Senior, if you want to come with us, it would be for the best. With you around, we'll be much safer. I, Xianshang, am honored. Thank you for coming with us, Senior." Anguish rose in Xianshang's heart, but he did not dare show even a single hint of it. Instead, he put on a delighted expression and quickly wrapped his fist in his palm to thank Su Ming. "Very well. You can leave now. Find a random place and wait for me. Once I'm done with my business with Heaven Traversers, I will naturally find you," Su Ming said faintly. The four people were immediately shocked and bewildered, but not a single hint of it showed on their faces. Instead, they wrapped their fists in their palms towards Su Ming and turned into long arcs, intending to leave the planet they regretted coming to. But the black clouds in the sky were still there, and the seal was still there. "We're going to leave just like that?" Su Ming descended on the ground and sat down cross-legged. The four people in the sky were stunned. The expression of the man, called Huayu, changed. When he lowered his head, he lifted his right hand, and a crack immediately appeared on his palm. The nascent divinity of Water Moon had its eyes closed and was in a daze. When it was flung out, it charged towards Su Ming. At the same time, the black clouds in the sky tumbled about and opened up a tunnel. The four people swiftly stepped into it and used their fastest speed to leave the dead planet. "Fellow Taoist Xian, we don't say anything else. We have to leave quickly. That wicked person is incredibly daring. He actually killed a Heaven Traverser. Looks like this is Heaven Traverser's territory. Powerful warriors will be coming soon. Let's go," Xianshang immediately said. He bit the tip of his tongue and coughed up a mouthful of blood, then executed blood escape, a move that was very common among cultivators but rarely used. The other 3 people did the same thing, and the blood shadow instantly left into the distance. After a moment, they still fled far into the distance, but Xianshang did not stop. When he flew a little further away, he turned his head around and looked into the distance with lingering fear in his heart. What level of cultivation does that person have? He easily killed someone in Lunar Culpa Realm. Could he be an old monster in Solar Culpa Realm? Fellow Daoistian, you might have underestimated this person. When I observed him just now, I noticed that he killed those 3 heaven traversers in Lunar Culpa Realm very casually. This sort of person is definitely stronger than a normal person in Solar Culpa Realm. He can fight against a master of fate. The person who said those resolute words was Hua Yu, who had the divine ability to seal souls. His expression was dark, and when he said those words, the other 3 people immediately fell silent. This person is too strange. I don't know why, but whenever I see him, I feel my hair stand on end. To be honest, this old man has seen countless people, but I've never seen anyone like him. That evil feeling is indescribable. I have the same feeling as well. It's as if there's an evil presence about this person that can suffocate others. Looks like all of us feel the same way. I feel the same as well, since he dared to stay in that cultivation planet. It means that he definitely has something up his sleeves and is not afraid of the Paragon Heaven Traverser's Master of Fate. This person wants to go to Dustburners with us. Should we wait or not? The 4 people fell silent again. 3 of them looked at Xianshang. Clearly, Xianshang was the guide in their group. Xianshang's expression changed. After a moment, he gritted his teeth. Just as he was about to speak, suddenly, a loud bang that even they could hear came from the galaxy in the distance. There is only one source for this sort of rumbling in the galaxy: the destruction of the planet. The expressions of the 4 people changed drastically. When they immediately focused their attention and looked over, they saw the impact from the self-destruction of the planet and the indescribably dazzling light in the distant galaxy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1054. 10 breaths before the planet self-destructed. Su Ming sat cross-legged on the withered outer sky planet. He was waiting for a powerful warrior who would definitely come. This was one of the important reasons why he had come to Heaven Traversers. He wanted to fight against a master of fate. If he fought against a master of fate at full strength, he would definitely lose. But even if he would definitely lose, Su Ming still wanted to fight. He wanted to see just how great the difference between him and a master of fate was. Also, he wanted to get a feel of Heaven Traverser's strength. He wanted to know just how many masters of fate there were in Heaven Traversers. If there was only one, then Su Ming would execute his plan, but if there was more than one, then he would have to change his plan. Time trickled by. When the 6th breath arrived, Su Ming lifted his head swiftly. The divine essence runic symbols in his eyes shone, and they instantly filled his entire body. At the same time, a cold sneer appeared at the corners of his lips. He lifted his hands and pushed them down on the ground beneath him. With it, his body shot up swiftly. Soon after, the planet roared, and cracks continuously spread out on the ground. A destructive power of self-destruction erupted from the planet. At that moment, a cold harumph came out of nowhere. As it reverberated in the air, the black clouds in the sky instantly tumbled about. Once they turned into layers of vortexes, Su Ming saw a boundless expanse of Hutu Earth in the sky. Perhaps more accurately speaking, it was not Huda Earth, but a boundless palm. This was the arrival of the Master of Fate, lives and death of Heaven Traversers. He's finally here. Su Ming threw his head back and laughed. When he leaped up, the power of the planet's collapse beneath him became even stronger. At that moment, if anyone looked from the galaxy, they would be able to clearly see a layer of meteors charging towards Outer Sky Planet. They were packed densely together, and their numbers could not be counted. They were traveling incredibly quickly, and in an instant, they closed in on Outer Sky Planet. The meteors surrounded the planet, and as they connected with each other, they formed a gigantic meteor palm that was several times larger than the planet itself. It lifted its hand and seized the planet beyond the heavens. Judging by its momentum, it looked as if it wanted to crush the planet with a single swipe. However, in the instant that the gigantic hand touched the planet exploded with a bang. The force of the explosion, the destructive power, and the huge wave that swept through the starry sky all collided with the meteorite hand. A deafening roar echoed across the starry sky in all directions. Even the 4 cultivators who had escaped far away could hear it clearly. As the rumbles echoed, the gigantic meteor hand did not stop. The cold snort was still echoing in the air, and the hand had already grabbed the collapsing planet. It gave off a feeling that it was hard to tell if the planet had exploded first or if it had been crushed by the hand. At the same time, the meteor palm did not stop. It went forward to seize it, as if the owner of the palm was certain that the destructive power of the planet was contained in the shattered meteor, and the culprit who had killed his heaven traversers and caused the destruction of the planet was also there. A master of fate, lives, and death, huh? A deep voice rang out from within the collapsing planet. That voice was calm, and there was not the slightest hint of emotion within it. If one took a closer look at the shattered planet, they would be able to clearly see a man with long hair that danced in the wind standing on one of the shattered continents. Naturally, that man was Su Ming. "You're just asking for death." An aloof voice traveled through the area. The meteor palm became even faster, and in the blink of an eye, it closed in on Su Ming, as if it wanted to bury him along with the broken planet. Who is the one asking for death? At the instant Su Ming spoke, Ikang's projection manifested with a bang around him. The gigantic shadow of the tree instantly appeared in the sky and crashed into the hand that came to seize him. Booming sounds spread through the area at that moment. At the instant the hand crashed into Ikang's projection, it came to an abrupt halt. As the projection shuddered, it looked as if it was about to shatter. As it swayed violently, blood trickled out of the corners of Su Ming's mouth. "Ikang!" An aloof voice came from the air, but its figure could not be seen. "Even if you have Ikang's blood, if you offend heaven traversers, you will still die." As the voice spread out, the gigantic meteor palm exerted force again, and with a bang, it crushed Su Ming's Ikang projection. Su Ming shuddered and coughed up a mouthful of blood. With a pale face, he swiftly retreated, but there was no panic in his eyes. Instead, there was only calmness. The Ikang projection behind him continuously reappeared as it crumbled, crashing into the gigantic palm that came to seize him multiple times. Booming sounds rose and fell, and each time they clashed, Su Ming's body would jolt. He could sense the great power in the palm, but similarly, he could also sense that the incoming master of fate, lives, and death was not as strong as the one he had met in the area where the 4 great true worlds were stationed in the past. From the moment the projection appeared to the moment the clone truly descended, it would require a dozen-something breaths. This amount of time was nothing to Su Ming. In truth, he had already made perfect preparations beforehand, and he could have his Ikang clone descend at any moment. But he did not. He stood there and watched Ikang's projection being destroyed time and time again. He watched the gigantic palm closing in on him and replacing the sky, the galaxy, and everything else, but he still did not have his Ikang clone appear. Because he noticed that each time Ikang's projection crumbled, the projection that appeared once again would be much sturdier than before. It was like an ordinary piece of metal that needed to be tempered thousands of times before it would turn into an invincible steel. This was a form of refinement. Booming sounds reverberated in the air. Su Ming's Ikang clone had no idea how many times his Ikang clone had crumbled and reappeared. By then, the meteor palm was about to clench into a fist. When Su Ming cast his gaze around him, he saw that he was surrounded by meteor palms. It was as if he had nowhere to hide and nowhere to fight against them. From the galaxy, Su Ming could clearly see that the gigantic meteor palm was continuously clenching its fist as if it wanted to crush everything in its palm, including the planets, the living beings, and even the galaxy. During that instant, Su Ming lifted his head. The purple line at the center of his brows instantly opened up. At the same time, purple light shone from within. The malicious eye appeared. In the span of a breath, the meteor palm above him was magnified endlessly in his eyes. As it was magnified layer by layer, he saw the crack between the palms. A focused glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He leaped up and executed his full speed. In fact, he even retrieved Ikang's projection and had it fuse into his body, causing his speed to become even faster. In an instant, he flew out, and when a loud bang shook the galaxy and reverberated through the entire Heaven Traverser's territory, the meteor palm closed its fist and crushed everything. Su Ming rushed out from the crack where the malicious eye was looking. From the distance, it could be seen that as the gigantic meteor palm closed its fist, a long arc swiftly flew out from it. At the same time it stood in the galaxy, Su Ming's dark voice tumbled out of his mouth. Ikang. Once he said those words, the illusory projection of the Ikang tree immediately manifested behind Su Ming. That projection swiftly gathered together, and a purple-haired man walked out from within. The man's appearance caused the sky to churn and the world to rumble. It was as if a huge wave had appeared in the starry sky, roaring and rolling. In fact, with the purple-haired man at the center, countless ripples could be seen spreading out in the starry sky. Those ripples all retreated, and if it was anyone else, they might not be able to tell what those ripples were. However, Su Ming knew that they were the laws of the galaxy. At that moment, when Su Ming's Ikang clone appeared, those laws were forcefully chased away. It was as if the galaxy had turned into Ikang's territory because of Su Ming's Ikang clone. In that territory, all laws, wills, and rules would be moved by Ikang's will. A long purple robe, long purple hair, and a purple eye at the center of his brows. At the instant Su Ming's Ikang clone appeared, his cultivation-based clone moved, and his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole walked out from his cultivation-based clone. With Su Ming's soul as the guide, the three clones instantly overlapped with each other in the galaxy. As they overlapped and the three clones turned into one person, Su Ming lifted his head. A malicious smile appeared at the corners of his lips, and a deep malevolent presence spread out from him. It was as if his existence was the source of all malevolence in the world. It was as if wherever he was, light would be replaced by purple darkness. His level of cultivation continued, rising from solar Culpa realm. Even though he had yet to reach the level of a master of fate, lives, and death, he was infinitely close to it. An ancient air spread out from his body. That air of time surrounded the area, as if it could make the galaxy decay. With that malicious smile on his face, Su Ming lifted his right hand and seized the air. Immediately, a white stone appeared on his palm. That stone was naturally peace arrives when the elephant is here. He lifted his left hand upwards. As the galaxy trembled, a huge mountain appeared on Su Ming's left hand. That mountain was Dao Avenue Mountain. At the same time, a vast amount of purple fog spread out from under Su Ming's feet. As it roared, it swept in all directions and filled the galaxy, causing it to instantly turn into Su Ming's Ikang galaxy. I want to fight against you. Su Ming stared at the space in the distance. Gradually, a figure appeared before his eyes. It was a middle-aged man dressed in a light blue long robe. He had a head of long blue hair, and he was incredibly handsome. He did not have any wings on his back. There was wisdom in his eyes, causing all those who looked at him to feel as if they were immersed in the galaxy, and they would be unable to pull themselves out of it. The man's lips were very thin, and there was a rather unkind air about him. However, that unkind air turned into a callous air, and he looked at Su Ming calmly. Should I call you a Kang or Tian Xiezi's disciple? The middle-aged man asked faintly. So you've been here since a long time ago. Su Ming smiled faintly. Leave behind your arms and legs. In the name of a Kang, I will allow you to leave with your head. The middle-aged man's expression was as calm as ever, and as he spoke, there was a tone that allowed no argument. When his voice traveled outwards, the purple fog around Su Ming tumbled about swiftly. The galaxy where the laws had been chased away, and as the man spoke, laws appeared once again. However, these laws belonged to him. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1055. Su Ming swung his left hand, and Dao Avenue Mountain immediately grew infinitely larger. In the blink of an eye, it turned into a mountain that was 10,000 feet tall. When he lifted it, he flung it forward. The mountain immediately charged through the air with a loud bang and charged towards the middle-aged man. It was so quick that it closed in on him in the blink of an eye. You still can't tell the rise and fall of a master of fate. The middle-aged man shook his head. He lifted his right hand and swung it at the incoming Dao Avenue Mountain. The rise and fall of fate is determined by a single thought. All things in the world are fated to exist, just like this mountain rock. It is fated with you, which is why you were able to obtain it. But if I say it is fated, then it will be broken, the middle-aged man said flatly. Then he swung his arm, and the Dao Avenue Mountain immediately stopped in front of him. Su Ming's pupil shrank. He immediately saw countless threads appearing on Dao Avenue Mountain. They were connected to him, but at that moment, when the middle-aged man swung his arm, they were all cut. Su Ming's body swayed, and a feeling of emptiness instantly rose in his heart. His connection with Dao Avenue Mountain had been cut off just like that. This was not as simple as taking away Su Ming's enchanted treasure. It was just as the middle-aged man had said. He had cut off the fate between Dao Avenue Mountain and Su Ming, causing him to no longer be fated with the treasure. He would no longer be able to possess it. The rise and fall of fate. Go and search for your next master. As the middle-aged man's words echoed in the air, Dao Avenue Mountain shuddered and disappeared into space. At the instant it disappeared, Su Ming lifted his right foot and stomped on the galaxy. The galaxy immediately trembled, and Dao Avenue Mountain, which had disappeared into space, was bounced back from its disappearing state. You should have fought against a master of fate before. I wonder what gave you the confidence to think that you can fight against a master of fate. The middle-aged man smiled, and there was a hint of derision in his smile. You will not be able to reach 100,000 feet from me, because this is the end of our fate. When the middle-aged man said those words flatly, Su Ming's expression immediately changed. He sensed an indescribable power erupting from space. As booming sound shot into the air, he was forced back. From the distance of tens of thousands of feet from the middle-aged man, he was forced back to 100,000 feet. In fact, he had a strong feeling that he could not get within 100,000 feet of him. It was as if this was a rule that could not be dispelled. This was completely different from the first time Su Ming had fought against a master of fate. In fact, he could clearly sense that the person before him was slightly weaker than a master of fate in the past. But even so, Su Ming had a feeling that even though this person was not as strong as the master of fate in the past, when they fought against each other, he had no way of fighting back. Fate. Su Ming's heart trembled. He suddenly understood something. Why were masters of fate, lives, and death called masters of fate? Controlling the fate of others. Only by controlling the fate of the heavens, the earth, and the heavens could one be called a master of fate. A glint appeared in Su Ming's eyes. He squeezed his right hand, and the mountain rock in his right hand shone with a piercing white light. As it shone, a large amount of divine essence in Su Ming's body fused into it, causing the mountain rock to become several tens of thousands of feet big. A furious roar reverberated in the air, and the mountain rock turned into a loud bang. It was a pity that there were no longer any malicious spirits from Dao Avenue Mountain, so they could not form the malicious spirits weighing the elephant picture. However, as the elephant roared, it immediately rushed into the area 100,000 feet in front of Su Ming. However, at the instant it did so, The huge elephant shuddered and shrank right before Su Ming's eyes, turning back into a mountain rock. The countless threads that were connected to Su Ming in a faint manner were swiftly broken at that instant. "You dare to fight against me with this?" the middle-aged man asked flatly, then lifted his right hand and pointed at Su Ming. "I see that you have 3 bodies, and there are 3 fates with you. I will break the fate of your cultivation base." Once he said those words, Su Ming shuddered. An intense pain rose in his soul. It was a feeling of being torn apart, as if his body was being forcefully torn apart by an indescribable power. It wanted to tear apart his cultivation-based clone, which had fused with him, from his soul. Once it was torn apart, Su Ming's cultivation-based clone would become an independent existence, just like his enchanted treasures. He would no longer be able to control it. The purple light in Su Ming's eyes surged into the sky. As his body trembled, overlapping shadows immediately appeared on his cultivation-based clone, as if he was about to be torn apart. "I will break the fate of your physical body." The middle-aged man smiled. When he spoke, he pointed at Su Ming again. A bang rang out in Su Ming's mind. Overlapping shadows also appeared on his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole. The connection between him and his soul started showing signs of being torn apart once the middle-aged man said those words. "I will also break your Akang body." A brilliant light shone in the middle-aged man's eyes. He lifted his right hand and cut down swiftly through the air. Boom! Su Ming's 3 clones were leaning in 3 different directions around him. They looked as if they were about to be torn apart. An intense pain appeared on their faces. In fact, Su Ming even had a feeling that his will was about to be torn into 3 parts. If he was truly torn apart, then it would mean that he had turned into 3 independent versions of himself. If that happened, then it would mean that he had lost his true self. In fact, his memories were also being torn apart, causing the scenes of the past to appear in his head. They were shattering, but he did not panic. Su Ming had a way to solve the danger he was in. The simplest way was to summon the Sand Spirit. This was indeed part of his plan, but he did not do it right then, because as his memories were being torn apart, he saw an art he had learned when he was in Dark Mountain. When he saw it, he suddenly came to an understanding. At that moment, while Su Ming was in danger, far away from Divine Essence Star Ocean and beyond the barren lands of Divine Essence was true Morning Dao world, which was in the midst of war. There was a towering altar in Morning Dao sect. There was nothing above it, but at the center of it was a crack on the ground. It was a very normal place in Morning Dao sect. In fact, it could be said that there were plenty of altars like this in Morning Dao sect. No one knew what they were used for, but there was a rule left behind by the ancestors that no one was to step into Morning Dao sect's altars. There were a total of 97,000-something altars, and there were 97,000-something cracks on them. Only the ancient existences in Morning Dao sect knew that these cracks were in truth similar to coordinates. If they were connected together, they would form a complete set of coordinates that would guide the isolation grounds of Culpal Lord Dao Chun, the progenitor of true Morning Dao world. It was a shattered space that was connected to the entire Morning Dao world. It was a broken dimension, and no one besides Dao Chun knew what it looked like. Culpal Lord Dao Chun had been in isolation for a long, long time. If Su Ming could stand on one of the altars and execute the full power of his malicious eye, he would be able to see countless cracks in space within the crack with his malicious eye. If he could see through all the cracks on the altars, he would be able to connect them together and see a door. Behind the door was a dimension in space. It was the dimension where Dao Chun isolated himself. At that moment, there was a large amount of white fog in that dimension. In the depths of it was a person sitting cross-legged. That person had his head lowered, and his entire body was shrouded in fog. His face could not be seen clearly. There was no life force in him, only stillness. There were 2 items in front of him. One of them was a hairpin, and the other was a child's toy, a rattle drum. At that moment, the rattle drum was trembling. In fact, a few cracks had appeared on it. They were spreading out continuously, as if the rattle drum was about to shatter at any moment. It could not be seen whether the person sitting cross-legged had opened his eyes, but his body, which seemed to have not moved for a long time, shuddered once the cracks on the rattle drum appeared. Then, he slowly lifted his right hand. When he lifted his right hand, the entire dimension immediately roared endlessly. In fact, it even affected the world outside, causing a galactic windstorm to appear out of nowhere in true Morning Tao world. It swept through all of true Morning Tao world and shocked countless people who were fighting. In fact, it shocked Morning Tao sect and even the entire Immortals Union. The galactic windstorm caused all of true Morning Tao world to look like a bottle that was swaying violently. This was not the first time such a windstorm had appeared. It was the second. The first time was 1,000-something years ago. No one knew the reason for its appearance. After several breaths, the windstorm disappeared on its own, becoming a mystery that no one could figure out. Right then, 1,000-something years later, the windstorm appeared once more. No one knew that the source of the windstorm was the wind stirred up by the person who had shattered the dimension when he lifted his hand. The person lifted his hand slowly, as if he wanted to touch the rattle drum that was shattering. But before his hand could touch the rattle drum, the cracks on it stopped spreading. Instead, they started moving in reverse and closed up on their own, causing the person's hand to freeze in midair. Gradually, through the fog, the person could vaguely see that the person seemed to be smiling. That smile was incredibly kind, but there was also a faint hint of guilt in it. In Divine Essence Star Ocean, Su Ming's 3 clones were being forcefully torn apart. At that moment, as Su Ming lifted his head and understanding appeared in his eyes, everything froze for an instant. I have indeed been careless about the strength of a master of fate and overestimated myself. But this battle has also allowed me to understand what it means to be a master of fate, to control the fate of all lives in the universe. But while it might be easy to control other people's fates, it is the hardest to control one's own fate. You can control the fate of a universe, but you must not be able to control your own fate. This is also why I feel that you are similar to the person I met in the past. When Su Ming lifted his head, he lifted his right hand. This battle has also allowed me to understand why the art I learned when I was young has left such a deep impression on me. Every single time I think about it, I find it hard to understand because the art I used in the past was non-ordinary art. It was the art of a master of fate. Su Ming endured the intense pain. As he lifted his right hand, he swiftly cut down in the direction of the middle-aged man 100,000 feet away. Execution of the 3 evils. Please give me recommendation votes. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Start Point and give me recommendation votes or monthly votes. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 1056. The execution of the 3 evils, the killing of the Tai Sui. The 3 evils were also known as the 3 murders. In this world, there are 3 directions: extinction, embryo, and nurture. Extinction is the evil of calamity. Embryo is the evil of calamity. And nurture is the evil of time. They were also known as the 3 arts of plunder, calamity, and time. This was the execution of 3 evils art Su Ming had learned in Dark Mountain. In the past, Su Ming had used this art in Windstream Tribe when he was imprisoned in the house by his elder. He had forcefully cast the divine ability to lock down the house and bring forth the power of murder to break the sealed door. This was the first time Su Ming had used the execution of 3 evils. At that time, he did not understand the fundamentals of this technique. The second time, he opened a gap in the mountains in the land of the shamans and guided the miasma into Inchi. Once the mountain range turned into a horn, it looked as if a dragon was breathing from its mouth. Because of that, he changed the layout of that region and guided the power of disaster to set up a natural rune. At that time, Su Ming had only executed it after he gained a deeper understanding towards the execution of the 3 evils. Right then, Su Ming executed this art for the 3rd time in Divine Essence Star Ocean. This time, he truly understood that this art was not a mortal art, but an art for a master of fate. It could sever the magic of heaven, change the pattern, throw yin and yang into chaos, overturn the cosmos, defy the heavens. Its core divine ability was actually a severing magic that could sever a person's chi flow and destiny from the starry sky. It cut off all connections with the heavens, making it lonely, making it seem as if it had lost its eyes, lost its roots, and no longer existed in the world. It was like cutting off fate, causing one to be unable to control fate. In other words, the execution of the three evils was also known as the execution of the three fates. You can only control the fate around you. You can't control your own fate. That's why. Su Ming lifted his head and looked at Heaven Traverser's progenitor standing 100,000 feet away. Understanding appeared in his eyes, and his expression was calm. Even though the overlapping shadows were still being torn apart, Su Ming could ignore the pain. Because during this battle, he had already found the strongest art hidden in his memories among his divine abilities. As he brought his right hand down, Su Ming took a swift step forward. At the same time, his hair started to rapidly turn white from the tip. In the realm of mastery of fate, fate is the law. This first severing tribulation. Fuse the tribulation into the heavens, and use fate to draw it in. If fate exists, then the tribulation in the heavens will not come. Fate and tribulation are connected by a thread, severing fate in the heavens. The galaxy rumbled, and for the first time, the expression of Heaven Traverser's progenitor changed. When Su Ming's slash landed, ripples that surged into the sky appeared in the galaxy around the progenitor. As they continued spreading out, it looked as if countless threads had appeared around the progenitor. These threads were all in the shape of rings, and they continued spreading outwards, making them look like ripples. However, Su Ming's first slash had cut off the fate in the heavens. He had cut off the laws of fate between Heaven Traverser's progenitor and the universe around him. It could be clearly seen that there seemed to be an invisible sharp blade around the progenitor. When that blade swept through the area, the threads were all cut, and in the blink of an eye, the galaxy around the progenitor tumbled about and fell backwards. At that moment, when Su Ming took his first step, he stepped into the area 70,000 feet away from Heaven Traverser's progenitor. As the progenitor's expression changed, a third of Su Ming's hair turned white, but he did not stop. He lifted his second step and moved forward once more. Second slash. Severing the severing tribulation. Severing the progenitor's progenitor is a result of thick earth. It originates from the earth, rises from beneath our feet, and is hidden in space. This slash will cut off your fate in space. Su Ming lifted his right hand, and without any hesitation, he executed the second slash. Immediately, the galaxy swayed viciously, as if the universe was reversing and the universe was changing. All laws and rules instantly dissipated, and a large amount of ripples appeared in the space under Heaven Traverser's progenitor's feet again. However, when Su Ming executed the second slash, those ripples shattered simultaneously, as if he had cut off the connection between Heaven Traverser's progenitor and space. The fate in space and the fate in space might seem ethereal, but in truth, the galaxy was formed by an endless amount of universes in space. Cutting off these two laws of fate meant that Su Ming had isolated Heaven Traverser's progenitor from this galaxy, causing him to be unable to connect with it. After all, this was Heaven Traverser's galaxy. All the cultivation planets and galaxies here had acknowledged Heaven Traversers, and Su Ming's actions had forcefully cut off this acknowledgement and the laws of fate that had formed between them. At that moment, Su Ming took his second step and stepped into the area of 30,000 feet around Heaven Traverser's progenitor. A 6/10 of his hair had turned white, and the ancient air about him was incredibly clear. All of this might have seemed to have happened quickly, but in truth, when it happened, it only took the span of a few breaths. The third slash is to cut down the malice of time. I will cut off your fate with the galaxy. You still have the will of time in you, and your shadow will exist in the passage of time in this place. If time has a spirit, then this spirit's memories will contain everything about you. With this slash, I will cut down your fate with time. At the instant Su Ming lifted his second step, the galaxy immediately looked as if it had been overturned. Heaven Traverser's progenitor threw his head back and let out a furious roar. His roar shook the sky, and it shook Su Ming so much that he coughed up blood. However, it did not manage to shake off the step he took, neither did it manage to shake off the third slash formed by Su Ming's right hand. Slash! The galaxy changed. A vortex formed with Heaven Traverser's progenitor as its center swiftly spread out with loud, booming sounds. Wherever the vortex went, the galaxy would look as if time would flow in reverse, as if its memories had been wiped off. As the vortex spread out, the place where Heaven Traverser's progenitor was located at the center no longer had his figure in the passage of time. The galaxy there no longer had any connection with him. When Su Ming executed the execution of 3 evils, he did not cut down Heaven Traverser's progenitor. He cut down the galaxy, space, and time. That was why Heaven Traverser's progenitor could not fight back. In fact, this was the first time Heaven Traverser's progenitor had seen this divine ability from Su Ming's body. In fact, he could sense an incredibly rare feeling that had not appeared for a long time. Fear and wariness. Su Ming had cut down the galaxy's passage of time, but he had also indirectly cut off the fate with Heaven Traverser's progenitor. Boom! When Su Ming took his third step, his hair turned completely white. Some of the marks of time appeared on his face, but the overlapping shadows of the 3 clones disappeared. Once he returned to his original state, he stood nearly 1,000 feet away from Heaven Traverser's progenitor. As his foot landed, Su Ming lifted his right hand and hurled a punch through the air towards Heaven Traverser's progenitor, who was 1,000 feet away. This was a punch from his cultivation-based clone, a punch from his clone that practiced the art of swallowing hollow shadows whole, and also a punch from his Akang clone. At the instant Su Ming hurled his punch forward, Akang's shadow manifested behind him. Booming sounds shook the sky and earth, and the galaxy trembled. A large amount of cracks appeared on it, and, at the same time, the punch hurtled towards Heaven Traverser's progenitor. Heaven Traverser's progenitor had not even needed to attack during the battle. With just his words and the power of the laws of fate in the universe, he had practically been unable to fight back and had nearly died. At that moment, as his expression changed, he lifted his right hand and swung his arm in the direction of Su Ming, who was hurling a punch towards him through the air. With it, an incomparably huge palm appeared in front of Heaven Traverser's progenitor as the world roared. That palm was placed vertically in the galaxy, and, as if it was pushing forward, it charged towards Su Ming. Wherever it went, the galaxy would be destroyed, and in the blink of an eye, it crashed into Su Ming's punch. Boom! Boom! As deafening sounds rang in the air, Su Ming coughed up blood. Once he staggered tens of thousands of feet backwards, he coughed up another mouthful of blood, but there was a ferocious sneer on his lips, and a brilliant light shone in his eyes. As for Heaven Traverser's progenitor, his expression was as dark as a swamp. He might not have even swayed, but based on his and Su Ming's expressions, it was clear that he was at a disadvantage. He was forced to the point where he could no longer use fate and could only use the power of those in Mastery Realm to force Su Ming back. This was the same as having his divine abilities sealed, and he could only use his physical power to attack. This was because a runic symbol had appeared at the center of his brows at that moment. It looked as if it had been branded on his forehead. It had not shown up just now, but at that moment, it was dull and without any light. Su Ming could see countless threads floating around it in an attempt to connect with the threads of the universe, galaxy, and time Su Ming had cut off just then, but the fact that the galaxy had been cut off caused it to be unable to connect with the threads. This item was incredibly incompatible with Heaven Traverser's progenitor, as if it had been branded at the center of his brows. Clearly, It did not belong to Heaven Traverser's progenitor, but was an external treasure. In truth, his true level of cultivation was only at a small completion in Mastery Realm. He could not compare to the person who had reached great completion in Mastery Realm. He had relied on this item to allow Heaven Traverser's progenitor to control the fate of all lives in the universe. However, the result of doing so was that his level of cultivation would come to a halt, and he would never be able to truly control his own fate like the powerful warriors who had reached great completion in Mastery Realm. Once he could control his own fate, then the execution of 3 evils Su Ming had come to understand would not be able to cut off the laws of fate. This is your true power, and it is also the reason why I felt that you were even more difficult to deal with, even though you were clearly not as strong as the person I met in the past. Su Ming wiped off the blood at the corners of his mouth. While he was tens of thousands of feet away, he did not care about his white hair as he spoke flatly. How does it feel to have your laws of fate cut off? I underestimated you. This art of severing fate that was specially created is incredibly rare. It requires you to offer up your life force. When you cast it, you will definitely lose quite a lot of your life force. But even so, with my supreme power and Mastery Realm, I will still be able to kill you. The killing intent in the Heaven Traverser's progenitor's eyes was incredibly great. At that moment, in his eyes, Su Ming was no longer disdainful and indifferent. Instead, he was now an existence equal to him. In fact, deep greed rose in the depths of his heart. He knew that divine abilities that could sever the art of severing fate were incredibly rare, and the one Su Ming had executed just now was something he had never seen before. This made him want to obtain this art. As he spoke, he took a step forward, and an incredibly powerful physical power erupted from his body. The Heaven Traverser's progenitor's body could be said to have reached a state where it would not perish even if the world was destroyed, and where the universe would rot away but would not perish. I've caught a cold, and I feel terrible. I wrote a chapter, but the table is covered in snot. I only have 1 chapter today. Please forgive me. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come and vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.